Good evening, everyone. This is the March 14th edition of the Local Comprehensive Plan Committee meeting, and we are going to get right to business. I'm going to make sure everyone's ready. Okay, so we have approval of the minutes from February 22nd. If someone would like to move that.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Any opposed? Okay, we assume everyone's in agreement. Thank you. Moving right along. We'd like to provide a chance for public comment. And just to be really clear for people watching from home, because we're having a public meeting. This is not a public hearing. This is a public meeting. So we don't have to have public comment, but we do have public comment. It's also because we're following the Roberts Rules of Order that the chair, which would be me, or the vice chair, which would be Lindsay, if he's running the meeting, gets to decide based on agenda, crowd in the audience, other factors. We get to decide how long public comment would be per person and entirety. So it doesn't look like it's going to be a problem tonight, but I just wanted to go on the record with that. So with that said, is there any public comment?
Don't all rush at once.
We're happy to take public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to say I'm so excited for this topic since it's transportation. One of my
It's
big
transportation.
issues.
Well, moving right along, Asia, since you gave us that segue, we are going to ask Kate to just come up and brief us on how we're going to conduct today's meeting.
Good evening, committee. Kate Maldonado, Senior Planner, Planning and Development. So the overview for tonight's meeting, we are kicking off the infrastructure and facilities chapter. Just as we've done with the chapters to date, we'll kick it off with hearing from our experts with both staff as well as experts in the field. So I think we'll start with our Department of Public Works. So with us tonight, we have Dan Santos, the Director of Public Works, as well as Griffin Bowden, our town engineer. And then afterwards, we'll have a presentation opportunity from dialogue from Tom Kahir, who is the administrator of the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority. Before we get into the presentations, I'd like to provide a quick overview of the village community meetings to occur in April, and then time permitting, we will start an initial goal-setting exercise for infrastructure and facilities. As mentioned, this month, we are focusing solely on infrastructure and facilities. Tonight's the first meeting with the expert presentations. The subsequent meeting will be the fourth Thursday of March, Thursday, March 28th. And at that meeting, we'll look more closely at the strategies, goals, and policies for infrastructure and facilities collectively as a committee, reflecting on all of the insight that we received tonight from the experts at this meeting. And then the month of April, we have blocked off entirely for community outreach. We will be going to each of the villages in the town of Barnstable to meet the members of our public where they are. There's a calendar up on the screen, and I've printed hard copies for each of the committee members, so you can stick it on your fridge if you'd like. You also have Outlook meeting invites, and all of the meetings are posted online. The goal of these meetings is to go to the public and present draft chapters that we've achieved to date. And that's by the end of this month. We still have some work to do. So at that time, we'll have the land use chapter, housing, natural resources, and infrastructure and facilities. So we'll go out to the public. Each of the meetings will be held in the same format, where staff will provide an overview of all this hard work that we've achieved with the draft chapters. And then there'll be an open house for questions, comments with members of the public. Everyone's invited to attend one or all, as many meetings as they would like. I just wanted to touch upon the communications that we've done to date for these community meetings. A press release went out earlier this week, and that includes communications to all of our town councilors, our civic association leaders, boards, committee, and commissions. All of the meetings are also on the calendars, on the town's website, on the LCP Board Committee Commission website, as well as our project website, the barnstablelcp.com. We also sent out an email via our LCP newsletter. It'll be in e-news. All the meetings will be in e-news. Our e-news is sent out every Friday, so all the Fridays through the month of April, and then social media. So these are all the avenues that we're using to spread the word about all of these community meetings. And we also appreciate your help to spread the word as well. Flyers have been distributed and they've been translated. So we will have, when we do communications, you'll receive the flyer in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. I did want to note, we did, after distributing communications, it was brought to our attention that there's a special town council meeting that's in conflict with the date that we had originally reserved for the village of Centerville. And so we've rescheduled that meeting. The Centerville meeting will be held Tuesday, April 9th at the Fire District. That's the Centerville headquarters at 6 p.m. So it's easy to remember now that all the meetings will commence at 6 p.m. and the calendars are being updated to reflect that, and new communications will be distributed probably on Monday. We don't generally distribute communications on Fridays just as people are busy. I did have a meeting with the chair and vice chair at which it was suggested that we provide a sign-up list to make sure that we have committee representation at each of the village meetings. So I will be sending that out tomorrow. I also wanted to remind the committee and members of the public that at this time, we still have our natural resources chapter survey question posted online. That's on the barnstablelcp.com website. And that is asking for ranking 1 through 6 prioritization of land use with relation to natural resources. To date, we have 287 responses, 272 English responses, 15 in Portuguese, and 0 in Spanish. So again, we appreciate your help to spread the word to have more members of our community take the survey. So at this time, I think I'll pass it along to our expert presentations. And Tom Kahir is here, and he will provide an overview on current and future needs related to infrastructure and facilities, both for the CCRTA and also Cape Cod regionally. So we're very thankful to have his expertise here tonight.
Sit over here.
Hey, Tom. Welcome.
Wow, I'm glad you're still involved. My go-to person for many years. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide a few comments on the issues of interest here this evening. Many of you I know, but for those who don't, Tom Kerr is my name, and I'm the administrator for the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority. And I've been there now for over a decade, actually 14 years. And our mission statement for as long as I've been there is to be a data-driven agency with an emphasis on customer service and doing the best we can to provide accessible, affordable, safe public transit throughout not only Barnstable but across all of Cape Cod. We have 400 square miles that we're responsible for, roughly 400 square miles we're responsible for, 15 communities. And we have different services that we provide. Most notably is our fixed route service that runs hourly into all 15 towns. And here in Barnstable, we have the Villager and the Crosstown fixed route services, as well as the Sandwich Run and H2O that Sea Line that come in through Barnstable and have stops as well. So Barnstable is sort of the hub, obviously, of our transit operations. We also have ADA transportation. The for Americans with Disabilities Act was passed back in the 90s, and it's been a good thing, and we provide ADA service for anyone that's eligible. They have a doctor's note saying that they're eligible, and we go through a process and provide transportation for anyone who lives within 3/4 of a mile from any of our fixed routes, which are all 15 towns. We have what is known as dial-a-ride service, or DART, you may have heard of. You call 24 hours ahead of time, schedule a ride. We will come to your home, take you where you need to go. Grocery shopping, healthcare, church services, those kind of things. We try to share rides. We try to group folks together. If they're all going shopping at the same time, it can help us share rides. But it's been a very successful service that we've provided for years, and we average about 600 trips a day on DART, so Cape-wide. We also have a new service, relatively new, called Smart DART. It's an app-based service that the town of Barnstable and Yarmouth have used now for 3 or 4 years. When we originally developed it internally, in-house, we wanted it to be for 15 Cape communities at once, but of course COVID and driver shortages and things prevented us from expanding to the entire Cape, excuse me, when we first developed it. So we placed it into the town of Barnstable and Yarmouth for the last three and a half years. And it's been overwhelmingly successful. You summon one of our vehicles and we come to get you within a half an hour and take you where you need to go. Ideally, they're intended for short trips and not to hurt our fixed route service, to get folks to our fixed route if you want to go on to other destinations. But for instance, in some communities where beach parking is a problem, you can call us, take you down there and come pick you up. All you do is summon us on your app. And you can get all that information on our website, capecodrta.org. So on February 1st, we just, because of the fact that we've now been able to attract more drivers to our service, we have introduced Smart DART to the entire Cape. And we've developed zones. There's 7 different zones on the Cape, and Barnstable being the key. So if you download one of our apps, and there's been 3,500 folks that have downloaded the apps just recently because of our expansion, you can learn more about it and get a ride here in the town by just by summoning us on the app. We also have a Boston Hospital bus. We go to 16 Boston hospitals for 4 days a week. It's $15 one way, $30 round trip. Leaves from Wellfleet, makes 3 or 4 stops on the way to Boston, and very popular service. A lot of folks, even though we have good health care here on the Cape with Cape Cod Healthcare and Falmouth Hospital, there are some folks that feel more comfortable going to Boston or have appointments in Boston. So we've had that service in place for many years. And then, of course, in the summer, we have a trolley here in Barnstable, a free trolley that traverses Main Street and around the area. We have a train. We've introduced a train 10 years ago now, the Cape Flyer, which is a weekend rail service from South Station to Hyannis. And we coordinate with Highline and the steamship, so when the train comes in on Friday night, they can seamlessly transfer onto one of our buses and go right down to the boats and get over to the islands. That's been successful, and we work very closely with Highline and the steamship, and I'll speak more about that further in the presentation here. One of the main issues, and I know that the topic tonight is future and present and future planning needs. One of the big issues, obviously, not only Cape-wide but statewide, is the housing crisis. And I know the governor and the legislature is taking that very seriously and making it a very high priority. And here on the Cape, working with many folks, Lisa over at HAC and others, they've developed strategies in each of the town to address some of the zoning issues so that housing can become more available and affordable for folks. It's a long process, but I'm interested to see how it continues to unfold, and I think it's been working quite well. And the reason I bring that up is because transportation is a very important piece of any new housing development, whether it's big or small. And several years ago, in a previous capacity, I recall seeing all these, with the population growth exploding in the state at the time, I was concerned that they were building all these housing units, but when they were completed, they would say, well, how do we get people in and out of there? So the legislature and others have worked to make sure that the planning process gets done early on, and that transportation's at the table when the planning for the construction occurs. So now we meet with developers occasionally when they're proposing something here on the Cape, and we work on several committees, and, we're with the Housing to Protect Cape Cod group that I think Wendy's on that as well, and of course, the Cape Cod Commission. So transit and transportation overall is a critical piece to all the housing challenges and needs that we're experiencing around Cape Cod. Another thing that I think we have made a very high priority for several years now at the Cape Cod RTA, and that is, I know that we all recognize that we have an older adult population that exceeds most areas, not only in Massachusetts, but all over the country. We're like the 10th or 11th most densely populated senior county in the country. And so 5 years ago, we decided, because we have a large number of, I think, the next slide speaks to, well, you can't really see the numbers that well, but we went to a free fares for seniors over 60 years of age 5 years ago on Wednesdays. And we've seen our ridership tick up on Wednesdays, so the more folks are going across the Cape in various transportation modes to see the Cape with free fares on our fixed route buses. And so recently, we decided, when we looked at the numbers and read that 40% of Cape Cod's year-round population of 220,000, 40% of it is 60 years of age or older. So we decided to apply for a grant to make free fares for everybody free all the time, 60 and older. 60 and older, yeah. So that's been in place for the last 2 months as well, and we've seen our ridership go up as well. The Go-Card, I guess I'm jumping around because I just read this, put it together this afternoon. The Go-Card is a new card that we've had. We've had in place for some time what we call the Charlie card, which allows you to get onto our bus, and if you have a reduced fare, or if you're a student or a senior or disabled, Charlie card was what you needed to get on. We have recently developed in-house a more sophisticated card, and we're calling it the Go card. And long term, we'd like that to become interoperable with all the transportation modes. We have a multimodal committee here on the Cape, and we work regularly with, our transportation partners. I already mentioned Highline and Sea Line, but of course, Katie Service and others over at the airport, Cape Air, Plymouth and Brockton, Peter Pan. So we would like to see one day that, while one card can get you, actually ideally from Logan to South Station to Middleborough to Buzzards Bay, onto Cape RTA, onto the steamship, onto Martha's Vineyard, and that's what we're hoping to develop. And I know that's being studied and considered in various places, so I think that's something we should be thinking about in the future. And with that Go card, we've just recently introduced it. So we work very closely with our councils on aging. And so in order to process, to register for the Go card, in the last 10 days, we've had 500 people come into our facility to get their picture taken and give us their information. But figuring that Lower and Outer Cape and Upper Cape folks have a long trip to get in here, we're working with the councils on aging to have our senior mobility manager go out there and take the picture and send in the stuff to make it easier. But we're pretty surprised and pleased with the number of folks that have registered for this new card. It's really kind of exciting, and the technology is a wave of the future. The other thing that is that I think is relevant now and certainly going into the future is, in recent years, the transition from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions obviously is important. The statewide average is for transportation contributing to greenhouse gas emissions is about 40%. But here on Cape Cod, it's 55%. So we've been very aggressive in terms of planning to convert from those fossil fuels to electric. We've already had 15 electric vehicles come in that we received through the Mobility Assistance Program. And another issue associated with that is the charging stations necessary, to make these vehicles run. And as you read more and more about EVs and zero-emission vehicles, you hear one of the main concerns expressed from folks is that range anxiety. They don't want to be driving down the road and not know how far they can go, and that's an issue of concern. But we have 20 level 2 charging stations on our site, and at our operations center in Dennis we have 10 more. So we've started to develop these machines that can charge your cars, and I'm also working with some Cape leaders. Last week I met with Dan Wolf and Paul Niedzwiecki and Steve Tupper and others to talk about, because Paul Niedzwiecki indicated, and I'm sure Wendy would know more about this than I, but that people are calling the chamber from all over the country saying, what is the availability of charging infrastructure, because I have an EV and I want to come down to an Airbnb or a hotel or a motel, and what's the status? And it's a real challenge. So Paul indicated that the government is focusing on the Hiltons and the Marriotts and the big hotels across the country, but some of the lodging areas on the Cape aren't getting the priority. So it could have an impact on tourism. So we're working on that as well. I mentioned Katie earlier. Katie Service from over there at the airport and Cape Air folks. They have tried to acquire this grant for a smart microgrid grant, and Katie asked that we get involved because of the ground transportation concerns in the event of a catastrophic event or when we lose power anywhere. We need to be sure that we can keep our services running, and Katie was successful in getting that grant, and so we're co-partners with her on that. We've just now started the process, but it's kind of exciting to know that we're going to be developing that right here in the town of Barnstable over at the airport. We've also worked closely with the Volk School, the Upper Cape Volk, and Cape Tech and Cape Cod Community College to make sure that, curriculum and students in those facilities are getting ready to get high-paying jobs in the electric vehicle world. Like, we're going to need mechanics. We're going to need folks that understand the machinations of the battery needs and things of that nature. So those are all things that we're starting to do now, and those schools are doing a good job trying to prepare youngsters for that role. I think I already mentioned the technology and the multimodal stuff. Oh, thanks. That's Kathy, not me. I can't take credit for that. Some of the things that we're thinking about in futuristic things that we have conversations with MassDOT and others about is, I had a conversation a couple weeks ago about smart traffic management issues that are being considered and used across the country, actually, where transit vehicles get priority, and they're developing technology to manipulate the traffic signals so transit vehicles can have, a more efficient means to get through them, moving more people to their final destination. It's real, it's being worked on and used in several cities across the country. And then even longer term is the autonomous vehicle. When I put this down today, my staff laughed and said, they're not going to believe that people are going to be driving around without drivers, but it's very real. It's in 10 or 15 years, they're talking about. Pardon me? Yeah, right. Someone brought that up today. So it's something we need to be considering. And our staff, we meet every Monday morning as a senior staff, and we talk about, and we've done this all the years I've been there, how can we improve? What can we do better? What should we know? What should everyone on the staff know about what we're doing? And it's worked out very well, and that's how these issues come up. And autonomous vehicles is, there's research research institutions, I know Stanford and others, Carnegie Mellon, are doing some advanced work on it. So I don't see it happening in the short term, but, you know, it's certainly something that, you know, you should keep in your mind for the future. And then the last thing I wanted to really mention is our innovation over at the RTA, and it isn't me necessarily, it's my wonderful, talented staff, but several years ago, we, at one of our Monday meetings, said, you know, we get a lot of federal funds to help us operate what we want to do. State funds, federal funds, local assessment, and fairs. Those are our revenue sources. And we thought to ourselves, we get, you know, about 47% of our resources from the federal government, formula funds. So we have, I don't want to get too technical and confusing, but we have what's called 5307 funds, and it's based on road miles and ridership for the most part, and it translates into resources to our region, Cape Cod. And we asked the question about who gets credit for the ferry miles going to Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard? Who gets credit for that? And then we said, you know, let's pursue that with federal transit, and they had never heard that before. But we really felt that with the more we did research on it, we felt that we could certainly justify, you know, that being part of our system, that our region should get those funds to help expand our transportation needs. And for 6 months, we went back and forth with them, and then I asked my friend Congressman Keating to help out, and he got involved, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. And as a result of that, we receive, it's called National Transit Data, NTD funds. And we report the numbers every month, and we get money back, resources back. And for the last 5 years, we've got considerably more as a result of the steamship and Highline. We have agreements with them that we share some of those resources, but it still brings them way higher than any other regional transit authority in Massachusetts. So that's allowed us to do some things that others have not been able to do. So we developed a 10-year strategic plan and a 5-year capital plan. And the vast majority of that is the transition from fossil fuel to electric. But there are other items within that document that I would encourage you to look at our website and look at it, which would be consistent with some of the, I think, the goals that this body here is trying to learn about. So I apologize if I was kind of all over the place, but I put this together today, and so I'm happy to answer any questions, and it's great to see you, and thank you for the great work that you do, you know, protecting the Cape.
Thanks, Tom. I'm sure we have some questions, and I see Asia is chomping at the bit.
Thank you. So as probably the only, I'm not sure if anyone else rides the public transit almost on an everyday basis. I love the fact that you guys are making all of these expansive technologies. You're making buses free for seniors, people over 60, no matter what income. But what about the rest of us working folks who have to get from places after 5 o'clock? Your transit doesn't run after 5 o'clock in most places. So how do people working, I have to take lifts when I go places after 5 o'clock. So that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned the Smart Dart, another thing I want to ask about. So before, you used to be able to go from one place all the way to your destination. Now you guys limited it to a 10-mile limit for the Smart Dart. I took it yesterday, actually.
Yeah, but we eliminated the 10-mile thing.
Not as of yesterday afternoon, the 10-mile thing was still in effect from Hyannis going to Sandwich. I took it then back from Sandwich. I had to take 2 each way. So I spent, your ride fare is $3, then I have to spend another $3. That's $6. So you're making people to go 13 miles spend $6, but yet you're making transportation free for seniors, and you're not having transit after 5 p.m. What are you guys doing to address those kind of problems for the working class?
That's a good question, and it's a timely question, because a month ago, we decided, and we had a meeting yesterday with the state, MassDOT. We developed a committee to look at ways that we can identify gaps in our weekend and evening service, because we don't want to create a service in the evening, late at night, that 2 people are going to ride for a period of time. So we've got a committee to look at a comprehensive look at where those gaps will be filled in. In the summer, we expand all that service anyway, but in the winter, which we're in right now still, some of that is limited, so we can't provide some of the late-night service that we.
At 5 o'clock, if your last bus is at 4:30, what about people that get off at 5 o'clock, might work for a town or any business? What about the people that don't work, that get off at 5 p.m., 5:15 p.m., they're forced to take lifts and Ubers, even on your most populous routes. You guys know the one that goes down Independence through the mall always has people on it. So why not expand those specific routes till 6 p.m. at least?
Well,
Because
we do that in the summer, but you're right.
But people that live here year-round don't benefit during the wintertime.
No, I understand, and that is why we are developing this, we developed this committee with John Kennedy and others on it to look at those kind of gaps.
Do they ride the transit every day? Do you all have people that ride your transit
Yeah.
that go to work every day on it?
Some of them do, yeah. But the other question, too, was another good question I wanted to answer. I think it was a smart dart. Was it the smart dart? Yeah, this is new. I mean, when I said we've expanded from Barnstable and Yarmouth to the whole Cape, I think I said February 1st, but that February 1st was for another service that we provided with more. Right.
You all were doing that as
Right.
of, you all have been doing that for a few months, going all the way out to Sandwich. And now, then you all put the 10-mile limit on it. And as of yesterday at 4 p.m., there still was that.
No, that's what it was. So 2 Mondays ago at our meeting, I eliminated the 10-mile thing. And instead of February 1st, this is going to start consistent with our spring schedule on, I think it's June 23rd. So there'll be no more 10-mile limit, but the intent of Smart Dart is for smaller trips, shorter trips. So what we've done is develop 7 zones across the Cape. Bourne and Sandwich, Mashpee and Falmouth, Barnstable kind of in its own, and Yarmouth and Dennis come into Barnstable. But that's not going to happen until the June schedule starts, the spring schedule starts. So I don't know if it's on our website yet or not, but that is what I was confused about. That is what's going to happen. There's no more 10-mile limitation, because there was a problem with that. Representative Diggs called me a couple of weeks ago and said a constituent was going somewhere, and after 10 miles, they told them they can't go the 14 miles. I said, what are you talking about? So I called the operations center, and they went and picked up and made sure that ride took place.
I'll make sure that when I try to request one and they tell me that again tomorrow,
Yes.
I'll make sure I mention your name and I'll
Yes.
give your office a call.
Yes, no. And talk to Dennis Foster down there.
Because I will hold you accountable for this.
Well, anyone who knows me knows that I don't make up stuff, so I'm sure you'll get that same answer.
So,
Matter of fact, I encourage you to call them and ask.
okay, yeah, let me just interject. So if we have personal follow-up questions, Tom's really accessible and happy to chat. But I think what we need to pick his brain on is future vision, land use. We're a land use committee, and we
But I
want to
think,
try to
Wendy,
focus on that.
That was a very valid question.
It was a great
Because that's
feedback.
for the future.
That's-
People need to.
Very
real-time
valid,
use.
And she had raised some good points that are currently being looked at very
I think you
aggressively.
could keep talking is my point.
I had a question.
Okay, yeah, Megan's next. And Amanda, did you have your hand up? And then Katya. Megan, not Amanda, just Megan, and then Katya. And then I'll shut up.
So you mentioned housing. As we're looking at more developments and we're also looking at parking, and some of that parking is going to be limited, are you at the table with developers talking about things like cutouts for public transportation on site?
Yes.
And not just, well, Marston's Mills is part of Barnstable, but is that an ongoing conversation as to how to streamline that public transportation at housing developments and through town?
Yes, it is. I know we're doing it in Dennis, we're doing it in Harwich, cutouts, working with the developers, providing shelters when needed in proximity to the facility. So yes, I mean, it's an important piece, and We're also doing it on state roads with state cutouts as well.
And follow-up, is there funding for that, or would you expect to increase funding needs as public transportation needs expand? Because Asia's not wrong, like, public transportation has been woefully inadequate for a long time on
Yeah,
Cape, so it'd be
no, I
great if we
think-
could expand it.
Thank you for the question, Megan. It's, I will say this, I just mentioned that the windfall that we've been enjoying with federal funds that helps us contribute to those kind of initiatives. But the state legislature has really stepped up too in the last few years. And we've received significantly more state contract assistance, which has allowed us to do some of the things that I mentioned in the presentation. But some of the bigger projects that require a great deal of construction, there are some sort of grant availability from government and MassDOT, others. But it's an important piece of the planning process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was Mark, not a minute, and then Katya, okay.
Thank you. This is just a question about when we're looking at use in different areas and sort of basic needs. I'm unfamiliar with the routes, and do any of the routes allow for passengers to ride and stop at any variety of places of commerce, specifically places like food stores, things that would allow for basic necessities, things like that? Or is that something in the future as we have areas maybe that get a little more dense? Is that some consideration of where we don't have it currently, that they would be able to get to those areas and come back?
No, that's a good question. Thank you, Mark. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have what is called a DOT service. Usually it's an 18-seat cutaway bus that you call a day before, and if you want to go shopping, our staff down there tries to put folks together if they're going to stop and shop, and set up times that are convenient. So that in dealing with that type of thing, we already have that. But a fixed route service is an hourly service. H2O comes from Harwich to Hyannis, Flex Route from Harwich to Provincetown, Sea Line from Woods Hole to Hyannis, Bourne and Sandwich Runs, Villager Crossroad. So those are hourly services that go by population centers, and those are generally our stops on our route, and you can get our schedule and see where we stop. And most of them all stop in those kind of facilities, and then they're hourly service. So those are the two available transportation modes that I think would be appropriate for that type of thing.
Yeah, and the curiosity only came as we strive for a walkable downtown core or a walkable city. Is there a kind of a stopgap, as you point out? But thank you for that information. Thank you.
Let me just expand a little bit. The TDI process that Barnstable has undertaken. Elizabeth, great leadership here in town. Elizabeth is great. She's on our board, and she's always helping me with stuff. The TDI has been in the works for several years, which many communities, gateway communities across the state, have not taken advantage of. And I know there's been a lot of discussion, and a lot of it involves that end of Main Street. And of course, our facility is right there. So we want to be helpful and provide, whatever's necessary ultimately that makes it better and walkable and easy to access. I know that Mr. Brennan and others have constructed some nice housing there, and we've dressed up that corner ourselves quite a bit. There's still things like puffer bellies and things that I think need to be addressed in town. But we're working with the town of Barnstable, and we're always as I said, Elizabeth's on our board, and Mark always, Mr. Ells always calls us on occasion. So, we're happy to do whatever we can to contribute to those kind of, improvements.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you've done. It's great. It's a necessity, as mentioned before. It's really hard. I would like to ask you how language accessibility, for people who need to use the transportation to call, and do you have it? Would be wonderful if usually most of for language they think of Spanish. The biggest population on the Cape is they speak Portuguese. So Portuguese would be wonderful. And with the Asia mentioned, we have a population that really need year-round here, who really needs transportation. So expand, not just like summertime, but expand. And maybe it because people don't know what they have, what the options they are. And we do have people being forced to drive and you know, just like a crazy buy a car, they don't have like, you know, it's just, yeah, this is my point, that for year-round people, there is a huge population who really needs.
No, I agree, you know, as long as I've been involved in this business, I've heard about the need for expanded weekend and evening service. And so I always say to my team, you know, let's do that. And we tried some service down in the Lower and Outer Cape, you know, particularly when J1s were here. And we're finding that, you know, not that we have to be fiscally prudent in our decision-making, and we can't have 35-foot buses, you know, running for hours on end with nobody on them. So that's why I just now put this comprehensive team together to look at the gaps, and we now have the resources to do it. So it won't just be summer. We will be, we'd probably be doing it right now, but my team says, let's wait till the next, we have 3 different schedules a year at different times. But your point is well taken, that it isn't just the summer that the folks are in need. In terms of, you know, the bilingual opportunity, you can click on our thing, and we have 5 languages that translate the information necessary, and we have a bilingual person at our desk, Mariella, who works at our desk, and she helps us every day, you know, talking.
Does she speak Portuguese?
Yes.
Okay. Haitian Creole?
No, I don't think she speaks that.
Do you all have a person that speaks Haitian Creole? Because that's another language that is spoken significantly here, and I found that community gets absolutely no resources whatsoever.
Well, we don't have a very big staff, but we have the ability to translate, but we don't have,
I mean, I feel like there should be someone on your staff that speaks that language as well, so that immigrant population has someone that they can count on. Because I know they go to your place, they go to drop-in center that I work at, health ministry, and they look for resources, and there's nothing really for them. So I just want to make sure that we can expand it so that they have that language availability as well.
I will check on that tomorrow, see what we're doing about it. Thank you.
We're here to pick his brain, pick it clean.
I'm just curious, what would you identify as kind of your major challenges, that you see happening presently and in the future, and how can the town of Barnstable be supportive and involved in that?
Yeah, you know, I was trying to think of those kind of things all afternoon, because I understand that's the objective of having this hearing. You know, we have challenges all the time. I mean, my goal is to provide safe, accessible, affordable, public transit all over Cape Cod. We did 800,000 trips last year, and I want to expand so that it's more accessible. That's why we developed Smart Dart in-house. Our IT guy developed that himself before microtransit was a buzz phrase. And it's worked with great success for the most part, but your points are very well taken, and we're going to address it. But, you know, there are challenges. You know, we have some funds now, and we have resources, but we always have to be, you know, we have to concentrate on the funding that we receive, and any new service, the town where that service occurs, could be assessed more money. We've never had to raise the assessment from any town since I've been there, more than 2.5%. Which is something I'm very proud of. So the towns have not had to contribute more than anywhere else. So, but Amanda, I'll continue to think about that, and I'll send a note over to you folks about, you know, those type of more specific answers, because I know I'm kind of vague about that.
Katya.
Have you considered to consult the population, what they would like to have, their needs? Like especially the immigrant population, to have something like how to address their needs?
Do you do an annual survey, Tom, or
Some.
customer?
We do seat surveys a lot on the buses, and we periodic inquiries and those kind of things, yeah.
Are
The
those
language
surveys and
barrier.
language? And
As I said, we have you can click on it and get it translated, but I'll learn more tomorrow about, what we can do.
I know this is a statement, but I like just to help, because, people, even I actually speak a little more English today than like a year before. And it still
You've got a lot
have
better.
me like, I feel like, oh my gosh, my heart pumps like, am I expressing myself right? So for people who comes, and we try our best to learn the language, but it's still like a barrier. So like motivating, people want to participate in. So I would love to spread out the survey and find out what the population needs. So,
Well,
yeah, something
well,
like
first
that.
of
I think
all-
would be wonderful.
First of all, you speak very well. And secondly, I will check with Kathy tomorrow, because I know that this is the kind of thing that we like to learn. I don't get calls about it, but I do know we have different populations, so it is a problem, I'm sure. But I don't get any, when I get a call on something, I address it. But I will bring this up with the team tomorrow and see if we can do a better job, and we'll contact you about that. Okay?
Please do, I
Sue?
love that survey, so I can give it to our communities.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll have a transportation survey as part of our process anyway. Sue?
Tom, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, I haven't seen you for a long time.
I know. I've noticed that there's been a concern among some people about the lack of parking at some of the larger developments that have been proposed and they're mostly in Hyannis. In your experience, do people's use of the buses, or can people's use of the buses as time goes on justify reducing the need for on-site parking?
I mean, that's the goal. I mean, I think public transportation is supposed to, help address some of those challenges. And, we've had success in improving our ridership, but, it's hard to get people out of their cars. A lot of people just will never let go of that wheel and just want to drive. But we do go to all the big stores. We stop. They're on our fixed routes, and we have these other, Dart and Smart Dart now available for people to get there and get back in a reasonably efficient manner.
You go to Village Green and Cromwell Court.
Yeah,
The Village Green is my part. You pick probably 50 people up
Yeah.
a day there.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that is something that we try to do, and that's why we've developed relationships with developers, and we've developed relationships with the business community. When Wendy was there, she'd call us every month about something we had to help her with or to learn more about. And she was so lucky to have her on the Cape, tremendous leader. And when the bridges get done eventually, she's the reason.
So
it
we're going to have a lot of
sounds like-
transit coming over those bridges, right, Tom?
We are.
Yeah.
We are indeed.
Sue?
It sounds like that you would be responsive to the fact that there might be more people someplace that didn't have a car.
Yes, yeah. Well,
And
we just did-
theoretically, people who were moving into some place that didn't have tons of parking available would understand that and would have figured out that, yes, we could take the bus where
And
we
we would
needed
put
to
a
go.
shelter there, and we would put a stop there, and that's what we do. And also, some of you are familiar with environmental justice communities. Well, I'm a member, along with Wendy and others, on the 5Cs, Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative, dealing with climate-related issues. And we just did a thorough analysis of our entire Cape service and identified, 4 EJ communities, and are focusing them as higher priorities. So the folks you want is, affluent are able we're doing that. So we're aware of it. We're always trying to get better. We're not perfect, but we're doing a pretty good job. My team is great.
Well, I'm sorry, one more question, but you mentioned climate change. I know that you're, transitioning to the electric buses. Are there other things that you're finding that you need or want to do?
Well, we got ahead of the electric vehicle, zero-emission vehicle issue before anybody else really did. We hired a company from Pennsylvania called Hatch Associates. They're the foremost leaders in climate-related transportation issues. And they, in 10 months, gave us, 10 deliverables. We did a newsletter every 15th of the month to tell us where we are, guiding us and telling us what we need to be doing. And we completed that in October, and that's why we're so far ahead of everybody else. We've got already 20 electric vehicles. But there are still challenges, the charging infrastructure. I say this all the time, smart people don't even know that, there's level 1, level 2, level 3, the cost, how long the charge takes, There's a lot of things that people are hesitant to buy an expensive electric vehicle, but the greenhouse gas emissions, and here on the Cape with sea level rise and other issues that are climate related, I think we're in good hands. And of course, with the Cape Cod Commission, and I didn't mention Steve Tupper, but Steve Tupper and Christie over there, I mean, they do such a tremendous job, as you know, Sue. You work with them all. But, we're fortunate we have smart thinking people that I think, the Cape is, the Secretary of Transportation said to us last time she was down, she said, if all the transit authorities, were as innovative as you guys are, she said, I could go on vacation for a few months. I've bragged about that. It isn't just me, it's our great team, but we're doing some things right.
Tom, I have a couple of questions. In terms of because you're absolutely right about EV infrastructure. So who's responsible for building electric vehicle infrastructure is my first question. Then I have a follow-up.
Well, we're working with Eversource. We're working with a lot of companies. We've had 20 charging stations on our site at the Hyannis Transportation Center for 5 years now. So we did it before it was fashionable, and a lot of it came from grants, from federal grants and state grants. The government's really emphasizing the importance of all of this stuff. So we did that when we did our solar array over there too. Remember when we did our solar array, we put, it reduced our energy demand by 92%, 6-7 years ago. So yeah, I mean, we've just worked with those groups.
So I guess my follow-up question is, has anyone done a forecast of how much infrastructure we need for EVs? I mean, if every car on the road becomes an EV by X year, do we know how much it's going to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, Dan Wolf called me about a month ago and said, Tom, I don't know if there's enough thought or planning being done about that very issue. Can you pull together some sort of meeting? So I called Steve Tupper, I called Paul Nedzwicki, I called this gentleman, Terry Gallagher. He's on the Assembly of Delegates, and he's kind of been the leader in this effort to try to, he actually proposed a proclamation, and a resolution talking about the importance of charging infrastructure. And then Steve was working with the state and identifying locations across Cape Cod where these stations should be located, because some of our new electric buses, we're going to have en route charging because they can't make it from Provincetown to Hyannis or Hyannis to Woods Hole. So we're going to have to identify areas. We'll switch off buses. It's complicated stuff, and it's all kind of in the infant stages of discussion. But the Cape Cod Commission is doing that kind of work right now.
I think that was it. Did I see another question?
I have another quick.
Okay, Bob.
Just really to follow up on the last couple questions. Tom, you mentioned that there is already in existence a number of these charging stations at various locations. Are these charging stations available for anybody? Like, Joe Blow's driving from A to B needs a charge?
It's a great question, and I'm not an authority on it, but I know that all of the ones I'm aware of are level 2, and they take 5 or 6 hours to charge the whole, the battery to get to go 150, 200 miles. So level 2, level 1 is like when you buy an EV, they have it in your house and you hook it up at night, you have all night, you can charge it. Level 2 is the more common, the ones you see around. And level 3 is an expensive, very expensive apparatus that can give you a quicker charge. But all of the ones you're speaking to, I think, are level 2 at this point. Except there is one, the Tesla, is that what it's called? The Tesla has a different kind of a requirement as opposed to all the other EVs together, like Chevy Bolts and all those others. But Tesla, I think, has and I apologize, I don't really understand that yet, but for the most part, you can get a charge from a level 2 charging from all the cars that are out there.
So just let me follow up on that. So I don't have an electric car, so I don't really know anything about this. But, you know, Joe Blow comes from wherever, his or her charge is down. As I understand it, they could go to one of the existing charging stations that will be able to get at least some charge off of a machine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on your website or some other website, is it posted where these machines are located so the public could, if they were looking for a charging station, they could go, say, you know, whichever transportation agency, and then they have a map or something to say where they are?
There is an app that Steve showed us last week that shows all the locations on the Cape. There's an app. I don't believe we have that on our website, but I'll check on that as well, because I think it's in development. You know, that meeting just took place last week, and I'm behind the curve on it, but there is an app that you can get that tells you exactly where the stations are on the Cape.
The
Yes,
chambers.
the bottom line is
Go ahead.
making it available to people to know where to look.
Yeah.
Right.
In this case, looking where to look for the app, which has the location of the,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
the things.
A lot of the cars will tell you, if you have an EV car, it tells you where your next charge is. Mhm. Yeah. Asia has a question.
Do
and
you
then
all
Sharon.
charge the public? I mean, I feel like that's, if people have electric vehicles, shouldn't you all be able to charge them some money so that you all can make money back from it and expand services?
well, we have, if you pay for parking there, that allows you to use our infrastructure.
Yes, you partially have answered the question I have. I just recently replaced my car, and I did look at the electric cars and decided against it, at least at this stage. However, the question I have is, it's already been acknowledged, and I don't need to convince anybody here, we have a parking issue on the Cape. And with people who have the EV cars, can they, for instance, when we have our valued tourists who come down during the summer, can they just go and park up overnight, which means other people cannot? Or is there like a time limit, and there, you know, you can be here only for so long? In other words, if they're the level 2 and it takes like 3 or 4 hours, can they leave it there at 5 o'clock, and in which case they come back at like not 8 o'clock the next morning or 10 o'clock the next morning, or they keep it until after they've been to the beach and everywhere else with
You mean
friends?
at our
Is
site?
there a limit? Yeah.
At our site, we don't have any restrictions, but we have 20 different stands there, and in all the years they've been there, I've never seen more than 4 or 5 there at once, even in the summer. But it's something we need to think about. You're right.
Asia, do you have one more thing? Nope, you're good. Megan.
It may be on your website, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but is there some place that marks all the bus stops in town and on the Cape?
Yes. Yes,
All
we
right.
have a rider's guide. It's on our website, but we also have rider's guides that we distribute at various locations all over the Cape.
Okay, thank you.
Last chance before we let Tom go. Thanks. I want to thank you, Tom. I know that you've been at this a long time, and you've been a huge champion of transportation in the state for a long time. So as your former state role and on your local and your regional role, I just want to thank you for spending the time with us tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. It's great to see you all, and I know that some of my answers were kind of all over the place, but I'll follow up with Asia and Katia on those bilingual matters.
It's very,
Pardon me?
it was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, Amanda.
Thanks, Tom.
Great.
Okay. So I think next up is our Department of Public Works, talking about additional infrastructure needs or forecasted needs.
Hi, I'm Dan Santos, Director of Public Works, and I just have a couple of introductory remarks before I turn it over to Griffin to do the presentation. So this topic is vast and an important aspect of what you're doing, and we appreciate the invitation to come and share our knowledge with you and hear what kind of questions that you may have about infrastructure and facilities. The way we look at it is we have really three major programs. So we have our operation and maintenance aspects of operating and maintaining infrastructure. And then we have two major kind of construction, major project or capital project programs. And one is called the horizontal program or horizontal construction. And that is basically projects that are on or in the ground. So roads, drainage, sewer, water, things like that. And that's headed up by the town engineer. And we also have a vertical program, and that addresses everything pretty much above the ground, which is our buildings. And there's a little cross-pollination there we have because and that's headed up by the town architect, but he'll also do projects with fields and recreational things, which are on the ground, but we have him take care of those. So those are our major infrastructure managers. Again, it's the operation and maintenance, and then the horizontal and vertical construction. Our understanding is that for your purposes, we're looking at mostly the horizontal type of construction, which is roads, marinas, sewer, water, drainage, those kind of things as public infrastructure. The facilities are really buildings like town hall, buildings that the town uses or used to administer government. And I think there was less of a focus on that by you. I may be wrong. So I'm going to turn it over to Griffin Bowden, the town engineer, and he's going to go through basically our horizontal program, which is a lot of the things that you're interested in. The other major thing we're doing right now, which is kind of the elephant in the room, is the comprehensive wastewater management plan and all the construction that has now been undertaken. We have well over $100 million of construction projects underway, which is just a tremendous amount of work at any one time, and that's going to go on for decades, frankly. And you've had a briefing by Rob Steen, the Assistant Director of Public Works, on the CWMP, and so Griffin's not going to address that. But we're always willing to come back and talk further about any of these things because some of them can be long conversations. But if you want to hear about our vertical program and have the town architect come in, we can have him come in. His name is Mark Marinaccio, and Lindsay knows him well, has worked with him for many years here on our staff. So I just wanted to introduce ourselves, and I'm going to turn it over to Griffin Bowden, the town engineer, to go through the presentation. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Again, Griffin Bowden, town engineer. Dan took a lot of my introductory slides, which is good, so we can move through those very quickly. But here to talk about infrastructure this evening, and look forward to having this conversation. Right, so Dan started to kind of describe what the Department of Public Works does and our approach to managing infrastructure. I just thought it was prudent to kind of show our organizational chart, right? So Dan, as a director of Public Works, oversees 6 divisions that make up the Department of Public Works. There's the Water Supply Division, which handles water in the Hyannis area. The Water Pollution Control Division, which handles the water pollution control facility as well as our sewer facilities. The Solid Waste Division, which manages the landfill and the such. the Structures and Grounds Division, which by their name manage the structures and grounds, right? And the Highway Division, which manages, well, the roads, right? So those are the operations and maintenance divisions of our organization. And then, as Dan alluded to, we have the Technical Support Division, which is really broken into three groups. There's the administrative staff, and then there's the engineering staff, which is led by me, and then there's the architectural staff. The architectural staff working on principally the vertical construction, as Dan alluded to, and myself principally working on the horizontal construction. So, as you can imagine, a lot of different types of infrastructure in the town of Barnstable, right? We have 2 coasts, we have the 4th largest roadway network in the state. So I won't read all the types of infrastructure that are on there, right? I probably even missed some. But we have a lot of different types of infrastructure that make the town run, right? So I'm going to focus, as Dan alluded to, on the horizontal types of infrastructure, roads, bridges, marine infrastructure, and I'll touch on water and wastewater as well at the end. So how do we pay for infrastructure in the community, right? So there's really 2 kind of budgets that we do each year in the community, right? So the fiscal year is from July 1 to June 30th, and there's 2 main budgets. There's the operating budget, which really is for operating purposes, right? So of those 6 divisions we talked about, 5 of them are really operations staffs, right? They're not really getting into the capital budgets as much as really my group would be, or the town architects group would be, which is the capital budget being the projects. They're really one-time projects, generally over $50,000. They're requested on an annual basis. They're generally, the funding's good for a 3-year duration. And we submit our requests each October timeframe for consideration by town leadership, and the town manager's office ultimately makes a recommendation to the town council. Really around this time, we're going to start having those hearings next month. And then they're presented to the town council in the April timeframe, and funding for those that get voted for become available on July 1. Don't intend you to read this slide. But this is just speaking to the number of projects that get submitted every year through that process, right? So this is a couple snippets from the FY25 to FY29 capital improvement plan, which was released a couple weeks ago. There were 123 projects that were submitted this year for consideration. Not every project gets funded. Certainly not even a high percentage of all the projects get funded. So we really have to prioritize, and we have an internal process that the town goes through to try to prioritize, okay, what infrastructure projects do we need to do this year? Which ones are safety issues? Which ones are just desires of the community that need to occur? Which ones do we need to do to make sure that we stay on top of routine maintenance? And I'll talk about that a lot tonight as well. So just really for scale, was trying to show that, you know, there's a lot of projects that we submit every year for consideration, and there is certainly by that nature a backlog of projects, right? So we can't get to everything, can't fund everything. So roads, that'll be the first kind of focus for infrastructure, probably the biggest focus that I'll talk about tonight. I'll touch upon the other things that we're going to talk about. But as I alluded to earlier, this map's a little hard to see on the screen up there, hopefully better on your smaller screen. The town of Barnstable has the 4th largest roadway network in the state. Of the 351 communities. There are 3 principal types of roads in the town. There are state roads, which is in the town of Barnstable really Route 6, Route 28, portions of Route 132, not all of Route 132, and portions of the most of Route 6A, the village center being the outlier, which is actually town-owned or public. State roads are managed by Mass DOT. And we certainly work with Mass DOT to advocate for projects, but they are managed by Mass DOT. And then we have public roads. So there's 700 public roads in this town, 260 miles of public roads. They are principally managed by the Department of Public Works. You know, on the operations side, the Highway Department. On the capital side, the Engineering Department. There are various funding sources for public roads projects. There are town funds through the various funding sources that the town has. There are Chapter 90 funds, which is really the annual allotment that comes from the state for roadway purposes. So the community gets about $2 million each year because we have a large road network from the state to fix roads. There's the TIP process, which I'll talk about on the next slide, which is the local transportation improvement program, which is really the regional funding source for large regional impact projects, not just Barnstable projects, but the whole region. There are other DOT programs out there. Safe Routes to School is one. Complete Streets is another. We'll talk about that briefly. And then there's other various grants that come out, right? But those are kind of the principal ways that we fund public roads projects. And then there are private roads. We have about 1,100 private roads in the town. Roads that are not owned by the town, but are roads that are commonly used for getting to and from your house, or in some cases, they're even roads that you look at and you say, man, this feels like a main road, but it is actually a private road. There's about 190 miles of those roadways in this town, right? And they are managed privately. They're owned privately. In many cases, they're owned by the abutters on the roadway, so the people that live on the road. In some cases, they're owned by a homeowners association. In some cases, they are owned by a developer who built the roads decades ago and may or may not have passed away already, and it's a little up in the air as to who actually owns it, right? So it can be a little gray by the general nature of this, right? Some of the roads are actually classified as ancient ways, which nobody knows who really owns them at that point, right? So this is a big challenge that we have in the community, is the private roads, the number of private roads, and frankly, the deterioration of the private roads, right? The private roads are generally built when somebody wants to develop a piece of land, right? So you come in to build a subdivision, and the developer comes in, builds the road, sells off all the lots, and they're done dealing with the road, right? Leave it to the homeowners, and a lot of times homeowners don't know, one, that they have a responsibility for the road, but two, how to deal with the road, right? So there are a couple of programs that the town has where we are able to kind of step in and deal with private roads. Our biggest one is our temporary repair to private roads program. So through this program, the abutters on a roadway can petition the town through our office. And if they get 51% of the abutters to the roadways to petition us, we can prepare an estimate and get everybody, 51% of the folks on board. And the town can appropriate funds to fix the private road. Now, that's 100% cost recovery through betterments to the abutters on that road, though. It's not the town paying for it. It's the town effectively providing a loan to pay for it. So that's a pretty commonly used program at this point. It's a good program. We do about 2 or 3 of those roughly every year. There is one other program that is available for fixing private roadways, and they're really for the connecting roadways that are private. So these large main roads that feel like they should be public roads, there was legislation passed that the town council can appropriate funds to fix those roadways. That has to be done through our sewer construction and private ways fund, and that is a tool that has been used in the past as well to fix certain private roads. All right, so I alluded to the transportation improvement program. So the transportation improvement program is really how regional roadway projects occur, right? So it's a planning document that is required of the regional planning authority, which is the Cape Cod Commission. They're required to prepare it and submit it to DOT, and it helps advise DOT as to how, what the funding priorities are in the area. So this addresses roadways as well as transit, as we just heard from the transit folks, right? And multimodal projects. It's certainly financially constrained each year. It's generally federal and state dollars that every community on Cape Cod are vying for, right? And it's a critical decision-making process. And the critical decision-making process really comes via a couple boards that the Cape Cod Commission hosts. And one of them is the Joint Transportation Committee, which has a representative from each town. I'm the representative from Barnstable, which really works through a lot of the groundwork that informs the regional plan. we'd make advisory decisions for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, who ultimately votes on the TIP each year. The Metropolitan Planning Organization has less members, but they have regional membership from each general region in the community. Barnstable actually has our own member as well. So on the right, you can see that there are kind of 3 buckets of money each year. There's regionally prioritized projects. So these are projects that communities, generally speaking, prioritize and advance the designs of and submit to DOT for consideration. And then they get into a list of competitive projects that communities kind of jockey for the funding for to get projects funded. There are also state prioritized projects. Those are generally projects that occur on state roads, but not always. Sometimes regionally prioritized projects are actually on state roads, but they were just prioritized by the community as opposed to the state for whatever reason, right? And then a large chunk of the TIP funding each year is for the transit projects, which you just heard about as well. And then there's just a table that shows roughly what the regional targets are anticipated to be for that regionally prioritized funding over the next 5 years. So seems like a lot of money. Roadway construction's really expensive these days, so it actually is not, and it becomes jockeying for position by each community really to try to get in line for these projects. So this is a graph that shows actually last year's the federal fiscal year 24 TIP program. And it just shows the projects that were funded and how they were funded. Some projects are funded over multiple years, some are not. There are no Barnstable projects on last year's TIP. We actually received money in the federal fiscal year 23 TIP for a regionally prioritized project, which was the Burses Way Shared Use Project, Burses Way Shared Use Path Project, which is under construction now. It's about to commence construction. If you've driven down Burses Way near our office recently, you'll see a whole bunch of stakes and surveyors, and they're about to break ground on that effort. This figure is the state prioritized projects. So of those multiple buckets, this would be the state prioritized projects. This is actually a draft for the upcoming year. I just didn't have a draft for the regional projects for the upcoming year, but these are the proposals for the state prioritized projects for this year. You'll see, a number of Barnstable projects. The biggest one really is they're planning to resurface Route 6 over the course of 3 years. As you've driven down Route 6 in the Barnstable section, there are some tough sections there, so certainly needed. But that's a large project that they're planning to do over the course of 3 years. There's a couple bridge preservation project, as well as a culvert replacement project. One project that's not seen here because it was on last year's state prioritized TIP was the Cape Cod Rail Trail Phase 3, which is the first segment. So if you look at the Cape Cod Rail Trail, the big gap in the Cape Cod Rail Trail is Barnstable, right? Sandwich is currently working on an extension to the Barnstable town line. Yarmouth has an extension about halfway through the town. Well, Phase 3 is a project in partnership with Yarmouth, which will bring the Cape Cod Rail Trail from Yarmouth into Barnstable and to Mary Dunn Road at the end of Independence. So that project is programmed for federal fiscal year 24, which is the federal fiscal year we're in. We anticipate the bids going out on that project later this year, and construction starting, hopefully before the end of the year, most likely sometime next year. So that's exciting to be having the Cape Cod Rail Trail coming this close to into the community finally. We are, and I'll get to the rail trail a little further, but we are working on the next phase of that as well, and I'll speak about it. So just wanted to show the distribution of the funding through the TIP, and I know I'm talking about the TIP a lot, but the TIP's really important because it really is the regional planning document. It's really how these large projects occur. Barnstable, being the biggest community on Cape, has received a high percentage of the funding, right? We've received 23% of the funding in the 24 to 28 timeframe. A lot of that was on the state prioritized list, but that's 24% of the money's coming into Barnstable. And from 2014 to 2023, it was about 17% in the town of Barnstable. So, and you'll see that's the highest for any of the communities. So money is coming into Barnstable through that program, and projects are occurring. There are eligible projects that are in the pipeline in the future as well. So these are some of the bigger projects that we're anticipating seeing coming in our regionally significant roadways over the next 10 years or so, right? So the Route 132 corridor improvements, that's the town-owned section. That's a project that we're leading. That's a regionally prioritized project that the town of Barnstable is advancing. We're working through designs on that now. We've held our first public informational session on that in January. That's not going to happen fast. This program does not happen fast. It takes years to get onto the tip, get slotted, to jockey for position for those funding, and to get placed. But this is a project we're actively working on, and we're envisioning will get funded through the tip. We're really hoping it'll be a state prioritized project eventually due to the regional significance, but that's something that we'll be working to achieve later on as we get closer to construction there, right? We think we're probably about 5 years or so away from construction actually starting on that project. Couple state prioritized projects that our partners at Mass DOT are working on, an airport rotary retrofit. So this project actually will start at the end of the under construction road project of the Yarmouth Road and Route 28 intersection, and will come through the airport rotary and not significantly change the geometry, although it will. It will improve pedestrian facilities around the rotary, and it'll improve striping, lane approaches, and stuff like that, which make the rotary tremendously more safe and easier to navigate. Kind of similar to what you see at the Bourne Rotary near the Bourne Bridge. It's that type of project is what they're envisioning in that location. A couple more projects along Route 28. So Lincoln Road to Garden Lane. Garden Lane's a very small street, but it's basically right outside the DPW facility. So this would include the Pitcher's Way intersection as well, which you'll see later on is one of the highest crash rates in the region. So this is a project that we've been working with our partners at DOT and the Cape Cod Commission to advance studies on and try to make sure that this gets listed and gets funded and gets built. But basically taking that intersection improvement that occurred at 28 and Bursa's Way and moving it further west, right? So they want to just continue to expand upon the work they've previously done. Two more projects, Route 28 at Santuit Newtown Road. We held a road safety audit on that a couple years ago, which is a study that really looks at the safety of the intersection. It's an intersection that certainly needs some attention, and the state has recognized that through this. And that's something that they're currently working on the design of. Don't have a time frame for it, but they're working on the design. And then also Route 6A, new sidewalks on Route 6A is a project that the state is starting to work on. They're very early. The project review, which basically places it as an eligible project, just recently occurred, and they're starting the survey work on that. So that'll be a project that they'll be planning, and certainly will take a lot of input from the community. Yes?
Is that in Barnstable and West Barnstable?
The extents of that project are actually from just outside the village to Route 132 currently. Though, being this early in the process, that's certainly subject to change based off public input. All right, so talked a lot about regional. How do we approach roads here in Barnstable, right? So we do this really principally two ways. We have really a recurring CIP, so capital improvement project. That's our public roads maintenance program. Really what this does is it fixes our roads. It says it's preventative maintenance of our roadways such that if you stay on top of preventative maintenance, and that's what the graph on the right kind of depicts, if you stay on top of preventative maintenance and do some of these PM type improvements, you really ultimately save tremendous amounts of money in the long run because as you get into full reconstruction of roadways, it gets significantly more expensive than filling in cracks or just doing a surface overlay or even a mill and overlay. You can see that it's almost exponential, the increased costs as you get to these more in-depth repairs, right? So our public roads program is informed by pavement surveys that we do every 3 years. What that does is it basically drives every road in town, gives it a score. They're called road surface ratings or RSRs. And we use that to inform what roads need to be fixed, right? So it's a strategic plan. We use data, it's data-driven to make decisions as to which roadways need to be improved. These surveys will suggest the type of restoration that should happen, right? So it'll suggest this road, it's starting to deteriorate, you probably need to do some crack seal, so filling in the cracks that are occurring, but you don't necessarily need full surface treatment. This road's at a point where surface treatment's not even gonna do anything, you need to reclaim or pulverize the asphalt, make a new base, and put new pavement on top. So it'll kind of make some of those recommendations. We'll also use our eyes and our expertise to do that. And that will coalesce into really 2 contracts each year, which is a spring and a fall contract where we do our pavement restoration. We also have a contract that we do each year through this funding source, about $1 million each year of drainage improvements on our roadways. So that goes out and hits our backlog of significant backlog of drainage systems that either have failed because they do naturally fail, or are undersized and need to be expanded due to, our more intense and more frequent rainfall events or any other reason why they may need to. And then we have some of our preventative maintenance contracts, which are, as I alluded to, crack sealing and chip sealing. So the chip sealing is what we do typically in neighborhoods if roadway surfaces are allow for it, but it's significantly more cost effective, and you can treat a significantly larger quantity of our roadways by using chip seal. And then we also make smaller sidewalk improvements through this program, as well as ADA improvements. And we use this funding to do some of our traffic studies that we do internally, as well as hire consultants for sign requests, various designs of future projects, et cetera. So we get about $3.85 million each year for that program, and we use every bit of it each year and try to get as much bang for our buck as we can. Then we have capital improvement projects, which are really larger roadway improvement projects. They don't necessarily become those regionally significant projects we were talking about, like through the TIP, but they're, for instance, when we recently improved C Street, right? A project like that would be considered a capital improvement project. It's too large to do through our public roads program. It takes significantly more planning and time and working with the community to develop the project, and it's also generally more expensive. But they generally involve more than just resurfacing, right? Through our capital improvement program, we also would do intersection improvements. So if geometry of intersections need to change, or traffic signals need to be put in or replaced or improved, we would do that through a separate capital project. Streetscape projects, ped and bike improvements, and our ADA transition plan, which is looking to improve all of our pedestrian facilities such that they are ADA compliant. Those are all projects we would do kind of capitally separate from our public roads maintenance program. So this is the goal, right? So our public roads maintenance program, we take roads that look like the one on the left and we make them look like the ones on the right. And these are just some of the various techniques we use, right? So on the right side, you see a crack sealing crew putting all the black lines over all the cracks. That prevents the road from deteriorating faster. Kind of in the bottom middle, that's an example of chip seal around one of the catch basins, and then some of the various other improvements. So those are the types of things we do through that program. All right, safety, right? Obviously, we want to design our roads to be as safe as possible. A couple years ago, this was actually released in October of '22 by the Cape Cod Commission. The Cape Cod Commission developed a document called the Barnstable County High Crash Locations, which identifies through data the locations in the community in the region that have the highest crash rates. Don't expect you to be able to read this. Just look at the boxes. Those are the areas that are Barnstable, right? So on the left-hand side is just quantity of crashes. So what you see on there is you'll see Route 28, the large volume roadways in our communities. So I think the number one is Route 28 at Yarmouth Road. This was all data pre that intersection improvement. Route 28 at Burses Way. Route 28 at Austroville West Barnstable Road, which was recently improved, but the data wasn't part of this examination, right? On the right-hand side is really what I feel is a little bit more significant, and that's a a crash rate, so it's really per million vehicles that go through these intersections. And you'll start to see there are some of our more local roadways that actually are very high crash rates. So documents like this are very important to us, right? So we use this to inform what roadways, what intersections do we need to be looking at to make improvements on to improve safety, because safety is ultimately the number one goal when it comes to traffic engineering. You know, so for instance, on the right-hand side, one of the local roadways, actually the number 4 ranked crash rate is actually South Street and Pleasant Street. So that's something we got to look at, right? And
Do you all handle street lights, like the lights above?
It's a good question. It's actually a complicated answer. Yeah.
Looking at this graph, as someone who doesn't drive off,
Yeah.
you know, if you're walking down one of these streets
Right.
and trying to cross, yes, they can see the lights right there, but there's no light tall above light so
Right.
that the drivers can see people trying to cross.
Yep.
Even if there's a stoplight, if the person's going a little fast.
Yep.
And they don't see because there's no lights on the sidewalks.
Yep. Yeah, so every capital improvement project that we do, lighting is something we take into consideration. And so on some of these larger improvement projects, you'll see that we've done, C Street, for example, there's street lighting above the pedestrian facilities for that reason, right? Street lighting is very expensive, but it's something that needs to be done for safety. So the response to your answer is actually very complicated, which is, it shouldn't be, but it is. Projects that the town makes improvements on and has decorative, quote-unquote, lighting as part of, the town owns those lights and the town maintains those lights. The lights that you see that are on utility poles, they're actually owned, operated, and paid for by the fire districts, generally. That's just the way it's done, which is interesting and complicated, right? So we actually field a lot of phone calls at our office. There's a street light out on such and such a road, and it's okay, we'll call over to the fire district. Not every light on a utility pole is that way, but most of them are. Thank you for the question.
Because just looking at the map, it's clear all of those intersections, if there's a person walking,
Absolutely.
they get hit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of the intersections, you know, they may be signalized intersections, but they may have inadequate pedestrian facilities, and that's certainly the case and certainly something we prioritize. Great segue into complete streets. So over the last couple of years, 2 years ago, I think, the community became a complete streets community. So really what that's saying is we're striving towards having walkable roadways that are safe and friendly to all modes of traffic, of transportation. As part of that effort, we had to, with the community, prepared a priority ranking. So working with the planning department, DPW, and the Cape Cod Commission, as well as seeking public input, a list was put together. This is available. I think it's on our website as well as the Cape Cod Commission's website, of priority complete streets projects. So these can range from new sidewalks to intersection improvements to whole corridor improvements to, I think we just need a crosswalk in this location, right? So there's a wide range of types of projects. I'm not going to read them all off. Certainly I would suggest you take a look at the document, but this is a document that we use to inform proposed capital projects. You'll see the number 1 project, there's a Route 132 reconstruction. Certainly something we're working on. These are the types of complete streets improvemements that we make, right? So in the upper left is the Marston's Mills Village improvement with some raised crosswalks, some flashing beacon street lighting. You know, up in the upper right is also Marston's Mills Village, just a different location. On the bottom right is C Street, which I just alluded to. See the street lighting, you see the flashing beacons, the shared use path that was installed, as well as the narrowed roads, which were utilized to try to slow traffic, and I think they have effectively done so. And then on the bottom left is another just flashing beacon that was installed next to the Tractor Supply, which was actually done as a developer's requirement for that project. Spoke about the Cape Cod Rail Trail earlier. I'll expand upon it a little bit. We already talked about Phase 3, right? So that's a project that's going to be starting construction here over the next year. Phase 4 is a project we're still planning. We've received a number of grants from the state for the survey and the preliminary design of this, and we're actively working on those efforts. And we are advancing towards a 25% design, which is when we really start having discussions with the community about more details of where we're proposing these things. But effectively, you can see the map. It's kind of hard to see, but it would take the rail trail from the termination of Phase 3 at Independence and Mary Dunn, meander through the community, ultimately across 132 and up the service road to link into where the rail trail is going to terminate in Sandwich. Large project. We're anticipating it's going to be done in sections. One of the difficulties is certainly crossing Route 132. We're anticipating a bridge as part of that. Going to be a very large bridge too. So this will be a project that will most likely roll out in sections. We call it Phase 4 now, but we're really trying to work out those details as to how this will roll out. But this is certainly a huge goal of our staff, Cape Cod Commission staff, as well as the state. The state is very interested and supportive in funding this project on our behalf. All right, so I'll touch quickly on culverts and drainage. You know, some of our biggest needs that we have in this area is really, and I alluded to it earlier through the Public Roads Program, is maintaining and upgrading our roadway drainage, right? So we have 4,000 catch basins in the community. I think it's actually more than that. So staying on top of all of those, making sure we maintain those as necessary, so cleaning them out is an effort that we can't do every year. So we from an operations side, we do that over the course of several years to make sure we clean them all out. But there is always the necessity for upgrading drainage. Certainly, the more frequent high-intensity rainstorm events we've been seeing over the last number of years has exacerbated that need. So this will continue to be a big need in the community to make sure that we have proper drainage along our roadway network. The Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Survey System, MS4 for that reason, because it's very difficult to say, is a permit it's a permit requirement through the EPA. It's effectively requirements of communities for the Clean Water Act for stormwater. It requires illicit discharge and detection elimination, so elimination of potential pollutants through our drainage systems. It also requires we adopt actually a new ordinance, which we are looking to adopt here over the next couple of months, which would make IDDE enforceable, so we would be able to enforce pollutants from getting into our drainage system, as well as a requirement for a stormwater permit to be pulled for new development on land disturbance of over an acre. Right now, we really already do this, but we don't have a formal permit process. We review, the engineering staff as well as planning and other staffs in town will review the designs of site plans, right, and new major developments, but there's no permit that they have to specifically pull right now for stormwater. It gets reviewed, it gets approved, but there's no permit. We're actually required to adopt an ordinance that does that, and that's something we're in the process of doing here, but will be a permit that will be issued out of our office for new developments over an acre. Incorporation of green stormwater management where appropriate is something we strive to do. We've had a program in the Three Bays watershed for a number of years, working with some partners to install bioretention areas and types of stormwater improvements that actually treat for certain nutrients that we're concerned with, nitrogen, phosphorus, et cetera, to help improve water quality. We need to continue to upgrade aging and undersized culverts to improve both coastal resiliency as well as habitat. You know, certainly culverts can be restrictions to salt marshes, for instance, so there are projects that we look to do to make sure that we make our habitats what they historically were, but as well as recognizing that resiliency is a real concern, and making sure we make sure that we kind of take both considerations into account, right? So some of the projects, and these are not by no means all of them, but just some projects in this realm, the MS4 permit compliance certainly is an ongoing project that I don't see going away anytime soon. Our annual drainage improvement contract, the Three Bays stormwater improvements. We're also working on a couple of culvert replacement projects, one being the Commerce Road Resiliency Project, which looks to raise a portion of Commerce Road for emergency access purposes, principally. Hawes Ave culvert replacement. There's a culvert under Hawes Ave that has failed and is starting to sink and is a safety hazard, so that's a project we're actually working on now. to get that replaced. And then the Snows Creek culvert replacement is a kind of combination of all the types of projects. It's an aging piece of infrastructure. It could improve salt marsh habitat, and it also can be a flood mitigation tactic. So kind of hits checks all those boxes, and that's a project we're working on. So we started talking about climate change, but climate change, as we're all experiencing here on Cape Cod, climate change and sea level rise are a thing that is more frequent at this point, and something that we have to deal with when we're planning for infrastructure, right? The problems that come with climate change are more frequent and high-intensity rainfall events. Our low-lying roads, which is depicted really well in the picture on the right, that was Ocean Street this past December during a southern storm event. Now, we all kind of know this area. It's Bismore Park right there, and Ocean Street right adjacent to it. A couple feet of water right there during a southerly storm event. Wasn't even really raining. It was just a high storm surge, right? So that's something that we'll consider to be an issue the community needs to deal with. And do we prioritize, and there's decisions that come with that, right? Do we prioritize evacuation routes? Do we prioritize certain portions of the community? Do we harden? Do we retreat? How do we deal with this issue that is real, that we need to continue to deal with? So I already kind of stole the thunder of some of the considerations that are listed there, but our roadway drainage, our low-lying roads, consider raising some of the roads where it's appropriate or feasible, or take other considerations into account. Many of these improvement projects are generally not likely to be accomplished entirely within the public space, right? So when you raise a road, you go outside of the natural right-of-way because it's difficult to raise a road to do that, so that necessitates work on private properties, and that becomes problematic because we're impacting private property at that point. So that's a real challenge when it comes to these types of projects. Right, so when it comes to public roads, I kind of put together a list of what we see as our priorities and needs, and kind of did it in two ways. One's, more of a strategic thinking, and one's, some specific projects, right? So certainly we always want to prioritize safety concerns, right? That's the number one goal, is having safe roads, right? We need to continue to invest in routine maintenance through our pavement management program, such that we don't incur higher costs as a result of deferred maintenance. We need to continue to replace aging infrastructure. We need to improve our pedestrian and bike facilities and our connectivity. We need to have complete streets in this community and make the community much more walkable. We need to address accessibility deficiencies. There are certainly deficiencies within our pedestrian networks for folks that need accessible facilities. We need to consider climate change. We just spoke about that, right? And we need to continue to coordinate with Mass DOT and our other partners to advocate for continued state investment in the community on a regional basis. So that's roads, right? I'm going to quickly discuss some of our other pieces of infrastructure. I won't go into as much detail, but bridges, right? We have actually 7 town-owned bridges with a clear span of over 20 feet. These are major pieces of infrastructure for our community to allow our roadway network to go over these water bodies. So you see the list there. Mass DOT inspects each bridge within communities that have a clear span of 20 feet every 2 years, which is great because they give us the data, right? They go out with their experts. They send us a list. The form on the right is an example of one of the forms that then comes with 20, 30 pages of inspectional items that they point out. But it's expected that the town will fix their bridges, right? So we have a program to do that, and I'll speak about that in a minute. But deferred maintenance on these bridges and not addressing these comments when they come early can result in, load rating reductions, ultimately closures of the bridge, and in worst cases, failure of a bridge, right? So it's important to make sure that we continue to maintain our bridge assets. So what's our approach to that? We have a bridge
Griffin,
maintenance.
Quick
Yes,
question.
Yes.
Do we know what the average age of our bridges is?
It ranges, right? So the Oyster Harbors Bridge is over 70 years old. And you'll see on the next slide, it's one of my biggest concerns when it comes to infrastructure. Some of our other bridges are newer, right? So the Centerville River Bridge, 30 years old or so. And then the Mill Creek, the Millway Bridge over Maraspin Creek, 50 or so. So yeah, they range. They weren't really all done at once, but they're not new, right? So we are doing rehab and maintenance on them because they are they are older assets that need attention. Right?
Could I have
Yes,
another
ma'am.
just on that subject?
Yeah.
How are they classified? I know the state bridges have certain classifications.
Yeah,
and
so,
what about the local bridges?
They're classified as bridges over a clear span of 20 feet, right? So they're classified in that category of bridges that need to be, oh, as far as our rating yeah, so it ranges, right? So some of our bridges, for instance, the Bumps River Bridge, we just did $1 million rehab of, rates really well as a result. The Oyster Harbors Bridge, it has a lower rating. I don't know what the numbers are offhand, but there's significantly more maintenance that's necessary and rehab that's needed on that bridge.
How come we don't have tolls for our bridges? I know like in other places like Boston and other areas, there's tolls to fill,
Yeah.
even if they're short term,
Yep.
to fix these bridges. If our bridges aren't in great shape, why aren't we putting temporary tolls for tourists when they're here off season or second homeowners so that we can get it taken care of?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm actually not entirely sure how that would happen. The practicality of that on some of our bridges is a little difficult too, right? So these bridges are smaller bridges that we go over day to day, right? Like the Oyster Harbors Bridge is a big drawbridge that could be done. We have to man that bridge anyway. But like the Bumps River Bridge, which is on South Main Street, you drive over it and you get the scenic view for a second and then you're over it, right? So it's not really a practical option necessarily, and I'm not sure what the process would be to do that. So our approach is we evaluate the inspection reports when they come in, we systematically address these deficiencies and continue to invest in the routine maintenance to try to prevent deferred maintenance, which is ultimately more costly, similar to our pavement management program, right? Some recent projects that we've done are the Bumps River rehab. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's wooden piles that support that bridge. They were deteriorating and in really bad shape, so we put what's called pile jackets on, which is effectively concrete around them to structurally secure them, as well as a bunch of rehabs to the actual surface of the bridge. But that was kind of the biggest piece of that. Came out really well. And then the Oyster Harbors Bridge priority structural repairs we did about 2 years ago. We replaced a couple of structural stringers on the bridge, which were deteriorating to the point where there was a potential for a load reduction, which certainly would not be good. You can see in the bottom right, that's a picture of, that's not a structural member, that it's a steel member, but it's not actually a critical structural member. But you can see that's the condition of some of the steel on that bridge. So certainly rehab is necessary. So some medium and long-term planning and needs relative to bridges are, we really need to plan for the end of the useful life of the existing Oyster Harbors Bridge. It's beyond its useful life. It's a mechanical bridge. We invest significant amount of time and money and resources each year to keep that bridge functional. So we really need to look at how are we going to plan for the end of the useful life. It's not going to be easy, certainly. There's not a lot of room to build a new bridge, right? So do we piece by piece replace the bridge, or do we rip off the Band-Aid and put a new bridge in with a temporary bridge or what, right? So those are the types of planning efforts that we need to start thinking about, certainly with that bridge. Recent inspections of the Maraspin Creek Bridge as well as the Mill Creek Bridge recommended we start to plan for the end of the useful life of those bridges as well. That's not in the short term. That's more of a long-term, 10, 20-year time frame. But we need to start making decisions on, are we going to invest in rehab, or are we really going to start planning on replacement? And certainly with any significant rehab or replacement of a bridge, we want to consider climate change and sea level rise impacts. So marine infrastructure, there's a lot of marine infrastructure in the community. We obviously have 2 coasts and a lot of waterfront facilities. I'm going to quickly touch on each of these. I know Natural Resources already was with you, but I'm not sure they went into the level of detail on infrastructure, so we'll touch on it quickly, right? So bulkheads, certainly some of our biggest pieces of marine infrastructure. We have 8 town-owned bulkheads. We have a bulkhead improvement program that we started really 2 to 3 years ago to systematically start dealing with these rather than being reactive, right? So the American Society for Civil Engineers recommends we do inspections every 5 years of our bulkheads. I can say that historically has not necessarily been occurring. last year, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, we submitted a capital improvement project to start doing just that, right? So we sought funding for inspections of all of our bulkheads. Those were all done last year. We have recommended maintenance and repairs to our bulkheads as a result of that. On the right is an example of kind of the figure from the report for the Barnstable Harbor bulkhead with some recommended repairs. Good news, that's in good shape, but certainly preventative maintenance is necessary for all this type of infrastructure. And what are our priorities? We have been and will continue to plan for the replacement of the Bismarck Park bulkhead that is ultimately going to be necessary in the near term. Preventative maintenance is certainly something we need to continue to do, and we also need to, and it's this continued theme on all these slides, we need to continue to consider climate change and sea level rise, because that's a real consideration in every one of our types of infrastructure, certainly marine infrastructure. So with this next slide, I lumped in a whole bunch of things together, but they're all kind of the same considerations, and that's why I did that, right? So revetments, breakwaters, dunes, and barrier beaches. These are both structural, man-made, or natural pieces of infrastructure that we have, and you don't really think of them as infrastructure, but they are, right? They protect our properties, our roadways, our beach facilities. So certainly, again, climate change and sea level rise are impacting these pieces of infrastructure. There's also habitat implications with this infrastructure. So certain projects are restricted in what we can do as a result of habitat that we need to prioritize. So we certainly need to work with our partners at Fish and Wildlife and Natural Heritage to make sure that we can have a permittable project in certain cases that will actually achieve the goals we're looking to achieve. And a lot of these projects, there's synergies with dredging efforts. So on the bottom right, you'll see the current breach out at Dead Neck, where the southern storm has kind of washed through that barrier beach. We're in the process right now of doing a dredging project out in Katuitt that will use the sand to fill in this breach. That's going to be occurring over the next month.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
About the dunes.
Yeah.
What are you all doing to make sure that the dunes don't wash away like the ones that, I forgot where they are in Massachusetts, that they've spent $500,000 and the dunes were gone? What are you all doing to prevent
The dunes
that?
will wash away. That's unavoidable, right? And to in some cases, in most cases, that's a direct result of what I talked about before, which is habitat implications, right? And restrictions and regulations. So we, in many cases, are not allowed to harden dunes. It's not regulatorily appropriate to do so because they're considered a resource for either habitat or other reasons, right? So, for instance, one of the projects I list right here is the Blish Point Dune improvement, right? So we, every couple of years, have to go out and place sand on Blish Point Dune. And we can't regulatorily, under the current regulations, harden that dune.
Can private citizens go and do it?
So there are certain cases where private citizens can. So the Wetlands Protection Act says that if there is a pre-1973 home on the property, you can protect it. Otherwise, you can't. So the regulations in some cases make this a challenge, right? So there are other ways to have soft infrastructure is what we call it.
Can we change it?
It's difficult, but it's certainly something we try to do in certain
Does the
cases.
town do that? Or who
No,
does
it's
it go
actually
with?
regulated at the state.
Okay.
Yep. So Wetland Protection Act at the state that regulates that, as well as habitat regulations in some cases, right? So at Blish Point, they actually want sand to come from the dune onto the beach because it's good for horseshoe crab habitat in that instance, right? That's just one case. You see that kind of on all these types of projects. Dead Neck, for instance. Lindsay knows this well. It's nesting bird habitat, so piping plovers, right? So we're restricted in when we can place material there. So these are real regulations that are part of the process of planning infrastructure projects.
Part of the problem, basically.
Not necessarily part of the problem, because they're there for a reason, right? So, I mean, they're there to protect endangered species in this instance, right? So they're part of the planning effort. So we have some other projects that we're working on, right? So there's some breakwater projects, Sandy Neck resiliency improvements. Actually, Amber in my office is at Barnstable County's facility tonight, having a presentation on the Sandy Neck project that we're planning, which is ultimately a retreat project, looking at moving the parking lot back to protect it. And so we don't lose that asset to a coastal storm event. It's another instance where we have to go out and place a whole bunch of sand and spend a whole bunch of money on sand that ultimately gets taken by the water, right? So trying to take a smart, proactive approach to that resource. Channel dredging, I alluded to it a minute ago. We did develop a number of years back at this point, I think it was 2017, a comprehensive dredge plan which studied all of our navigational channels. Really, the biggest thing that it did for us was it identified the frequency at which we need to dredge our channels based on historical information and the amount of deposition in them. The snippets you see are just an example of the table from that report for Barnstable Harbor. Really, there are two different types of channels that we deal with. There are ones that have nice sandy soils in it and are able to go onto the dredge material can go onto a beach as a result. But channels that have silty or, in some cases, hazardous materials in it, so as you get closer to the marinas, right, they can't go onto a beach for obvious reasons. They're not compatible with the beach, or they may be even hazardous in some cases. Those need to go somewhere else. So those are the two different types of projects we have. We have to permit them differently. For that reason, the ones that can go on beaches, we're in the process of developing a 10-year permit, which basically approves all of those channels to be dredged and placed on a beach for 10 years, and we get to pick and choose when we do that, rather than permit them over and over and over and over again, which is extremely expensive and time-consuming. But the ones that can't go on a beach, they have to be permitted individually, and so there's this continual permitting effort that's ongoing. Really, when you get into marine infrastructure projects, you really gotta deal with permitting and regulations, right? So that's a big challenge when it comes to marine and waterfront projects. So priorities and needs for marine infrastructure: we need to improve our infrastructure to address climate change. We need to have the discussion of hardening versus retreating, right? It's a real discussion that needs to happen. We can't harden everywhere. So in some cases, we're gonna be forced to retreat, right? In some cases, we may wanna fight to try to harden, right? So those are the discussions we need to have as a community, and we need to prioritize those types of projects. Bulkhead improvements and staying on top of our infrastructure is important. Continuing our comprehensive dredge program and achieving our comprehensive dredge permit gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility in keeping our navigational channels dredged. And improving our marinas to support our programming needs. I didn't really talk about that, but obviously our marinas are the hub of our waterfront activities, and certainly improving them to support the needs that are needed there is important. Going to touch on two topics quickly. Drinking water. Certainly a lot of our infrastructure that we deal with is related to drinking water. As we all are aware, we have multiple districts in the town. Only one is town-owned, which is the Barnstable Municipal Water Supply, formerly the Hyannis Water System. It serves Hyannis. This is a town-owned enterprise fund, which is managed by the DPW. Back to my flow chart earlier, there is a water board. We have a number of challenges with drinking water in Hyannis that we're dealing with, most notably contamination, PFAS, 1,4-dioxane are contaminants that we have to deal with in certain of our water supply wells. We do have treatment on all of our water supplies in Hyannis, and we continue to upgrade those treatment practices to make sure that we provide the cleanest and safest and most reliable water in the community, right? So we need to continue to achieve fully. We have a goal, and ultimately are required to have fully redundant water supplies. So if one of our water supplies goes down for any reason, whether it's contamination or pumps fail, we need to be able to provide water still, right? We ultimately need to be able to provide water. So this is kind of the fundamental reasoning behind our new source effort, right? Looking for new sources of water to make sure that we have redundant water supplies. We have enough water to serve our community now, but we do need to improve redundancy of the system. Let's see, proactive planning for future growth. That's an ongoing effort. That always is the case when it comes to any infrastructure need. It's kind of a continued theme of all of these, right? And routine maintenance. So we have a number of projects that we're actively working on. The Straightway Water Treatment Plant, which is going to be a new water treatment plant to improve the both the treatment capacity and redundancy of our Straightway and Hyannis Port and Simmons Ponds wells in the southern part of Hyannis. The Mary Dunn water treatment plant, we have 3 well fields, really. We have the Mary Dunn well field, we have the Straightway well field, and we have the Mahar well field, kind of over near the airport. The Mahar well field, we've already installed a state-of-the-art water treatment plant. The next one's the Straightway that we're actively designing. The third one we'll be looking to do is Mary Dunn water treatment plant. Right now, at both Straightway and Mary Dunn, we have treatment. In some cases, it was done, well, in both of those cases, certain aspects of the treatment was done quick. So we didn't put a building around it, for instance. And for that reason, some of those treatment processes can't be used during the winter. So we have to shut them down, which reduces the amount of water that we have, which can impact our reliability and our redundancy. However, during the times we have to shut it down is when we have low demand. So we certainly have plenty of capability, but it speaks to we need to upgrade these facilities to make sure that we have reliable drinking water supply throughout the year, that we don't have to shut down because of it's outside, right? So that's a big investment. The Straightway water treatment plant is a $35 million water treatment plant. And the Mary Dunn one is right now scheduled to be about $25 million. It's a couple years out, so as time and inflation go on, that will inevitably go up. So these are large investments and large infrastructure needs of the community, so we wanted to make sure we touched on them. Yes?
So you're telling me you all can't just build a little hut and surround all the machinery?
Unfortunately, no, and it's partially because we're also improving the treatment process, right? So I didn't want to get into all the details of that, right? But for instance, at Mary Dunn, we currently have O&M issues related to the amount of iron and manganese that are in our water. So what that does is it clogs up the filters and makes it so we have to backwash them often, which is basically a lot of operation and maintenance, a lot of time we're not sending water into the system, right? So part of that project will be to add treatment for iron and manganese. We already treat it in one way, but a more reliable treatment that will actually remove it from the water and make it less of an O&M issue. So there's kind of more detail that goes into it there. I just didn't necessarily want to get into all those issues. We could have a whole discussion on drinking water for over an hour, right? So,
And we're not going to, but who pays for that? Ratepayers, or do we subsidize
Yes.
ratepayers?
yeah, it's an enterprise fund, so it is historically ratepayers. The burden of capital project goes on. So every year we do our pipe replacement program, which is about $1.5 million of replacement of pipe or lining of pipe to make sure our distribution system is more reliable. It is old in certain parts of Hyannis. Some of the pipes are 1910. So those are pipes that are still in service. So we go through and we either replace them or clean and line them such that they are reliable and provide good water quality. We're also going to do a water storage, one of our water storage tanks we're going to be rehabbing this upcoming year. So continuing to invest in the infrastructure to make sure this infrastructure remains reliable. Finally, wastewater, and again, you already had the CWMP talk from Assistant Director Steen, but this slide kind of focuses on what we do to our existing infrastructure, right? So our existing Water Pollution Control Division is also an enterprise fund, so it's funded by the ratepayers. And there's infrastructure that needs to be systematically, routinely maintained, right? So we have a couple of things that we focus on. Our pump station rehabilitation program. We have 28 pump stations in our sewer collection system. We need to continue to maintain those. Those are electrical and mechanical systems that need to be maintained. The images on the right are a project we did a couple of years back. Small pump station up on Rendezvous Lane in Barnstable Village, which was right adjacent to the water. I show this because I've had this theme of climate change all day, right? This was a pump station that every time we had a nor'easter, you would see the situation in the upper right where the whole road leading to the pump station was under feet of water because it was directly next to the harbor. And on the left is the actual pump station, which our staff pre-storm would literally wrap in saran wrap to try to keep it dry. Seems silly, right? We got to have a better way to do this. It did, actually. They did a good job, and usually they kept it reliable. But post-storm, there's only 40 users here of our almost 4,000 users. Post-storm, they spend all their time out here getting this back up and running. Seems silly, right? So we adopted a project, which was a retreat project, where we took that pump station, moved it up the road and up the hill a little bit, and now it's up in the island as you enter Rendezvous Lane, up above the flood zone, 3 feet above the 100-year flood zone, such that we don't have those problems anymore. And during coastal storm events, they don't have to go out there anymore. There's a backup generator such that it runs itself, and our staff doesn't need to think about this station anymore. So those are the types of projects and smart efforts we like to put forward as we work through these infrastructure needs. So again, quick slide on the comprehensive wastewater management plan. You already heard about this. 30-year plan focused on traditional solutions, so sewer and treatment. Our town staff manages that. That's done in the technical services group, so the engineering group, as well as, you know, Director Santos and Assistant Director Steen. We manage this program. We design and implement this program. So we maintain control of it, which is good, right? So we have a vision for how this needs to roll out, and that's how we systematically implement this program, right? So the program looks to leverage existing infrastructure, so most notably our existing water pollution control facility, which is a huge asset to the community. We do need to upgrade it to support the additional flow coming into the facility, but it's a huge head start, right? You know, Yarmouth right now is just today breaking ground on their project, and the biggest part of their project is building their treatment plant, right? We have a treatment plant. We do need to improve it and have significant investment there, but having this plant is important for our implementation of our plans. I put the website there, barnstablewaterresources.com. There's a lot of information there about the CWMP. I encourage you to refer to that. And with that, I will summarize really what I see as our kind of 6 needs, challenges, or goals, right? We need to continue to invest in routine maintenance to avoid high costs of deferred maintenance, right? We need to prioritize safety. We need to plan for climate change and sea level rise. Our infrastructure must address our water quality impairment, coastal, freshwater, so ponds and lakes, as well as our drinking water, which are really all connected. And our infrastructure must exist to support growth in the community, right? You can't have growth without the proper infrastructure for growth. And ultimately, our goal is that infrastructure must support our quality of life. So with that, I will stop talking and take questions.
Wow. That was a lot. Who has questions?
Big topic.
Megan.
I had a couple just as we were going through.
Sure.
First, I know you mentioned Fish and Wildlife, and I'm not going to out any of the spots for our recreational fishermen, because that would be rude. But is there kind of some outreach towards local groups as far as the bridge repair goes? Because some of those bridges are pretty integral to that.
Certainly. So anytime we do a project, we reach out to the stakeholders, right? So if, for instance, say that we were going to replace the Millway Bridge, right? That's a ways away, but say we're going to do that, right? We would certainly need to make sure the folks that use the Blish Point boat ramp are aware that the bridge is going to be out, and the only way to get there is going to be via Commerce Road. Or the folks that want to use the beach facilities or shellfish at Millway, right, at Blish Point. We would have that communication. We have a communication manager actually that works dedicated for the DPW to help us communicate those types of communication goals. And certainly in advance of projects, we hold public meetings and informational sessions to educate folks and to seek public input in our projects.
All right. And I had a few, but I'll cut it down to 2. Parking. Is there truly a lack of parking? And I understand that there may have been a study in 2017. There's a lot of talk about that. And personally, aside from Christmas at the mall, even years ago, never really had a problem finding parking.
Right, so there was a parking study that was done for downtown Hyannis a number of years back. Certainly Elizabeth could probably speak to that better than I could. But there are certain times of year, as you pointed out, where parking can be an issue, and certain times of day where parking can be an issue. But overall, we do have adequate parking for the facilities that we have. Now, are people kind of overreaching with parking in certain cases where, you know, somebody may prefer to park on street as opposed to somewhere that's further away because there's not enough parking at the facility they're interested in? Sure. You know, and are there satellite parking lots for some of our transit and ferry uses? Yeah, right? So to go to the ferry, in some cases, you need to park up near the airport and take public transportation or walk to get to the ferry. So that could be the perception of a lack of parking, but there is adequate parking. It just is a little ways away, right? So certainly, I think, we can always improve on everything, but I do think that we provide a sufficient amount of parking in the community. Yes?
I'll save it. There's
Okay.
plenty of questions. Yeah, I'm actually familiar with the study that Megan was referencing, and it'll probably come up again in economic development, but I think the study ultimately said there's a perceived lack of parking, and even in the high summer months, there is adequate parking in downtown Hyannis specifically. One question I did have about your presentation, are those road surface ratings public?
Yes, everything ultimately is a public document that we do, right? We don't have it posted on our website necessarily. We use it as a tool to inform what projects we should do. But certainly they could be made public, yes.
I'm just, I think everybody thinks their road is the worst,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it'd just be nice to be able to be like, oh, actually,
Right.
you guys have there's a science to it,
Right.
and, to be able to kind of rank.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We're in the process of doing our 3-year annual, or triannual, I guess, study right now. We're hiring a consultant to do that, so we'll have new data coming up towards the end of the year that will kind of see how we've been doing, right? And certainly, I think that's probably a good idea.
And not to say that you guys don't maintain the roads really well. I'm just everyone's like,
No,
"Oh,
everybody
there's a pothole," and
everybody always, I agree. Everybody wants their roadway maintained. Everybody's
I think
that
the
way.
Mills has some of the worst roads I've seen.
Katya.
Yeah, it was a lot to take, a lot of information. Wow, I feel, but thank you for the hard work you're done. But my question it is like time frame on the work you done on our streets, especially for our community who is growing, like. And there are many of them who are going to work on bicycles, riding a bicycle at night, and come to the point with the lights. I do have people who walks and comes with bicycles so to the ESL class, and it is dark. So I did ride also, so I feel like you are just like this little tank, for the bike. Not safe. I don't feel safe. So, yeah. So how it is the priority for the people that, we're starting life here, that don't have many resources, all that. So my question it is, I know you're doing a really fantastic work, but how could you speed it?
Speed up the work on making sure that us who walk actually can be safe, because it's not safe at this time of night when you don't drive.
Of course, certainly agree, right? We work to implement projects as quickly as we can, right? So ultimately, the community is financially restricted as well as resource restricted, right? Like we don't have unlimited people to do work, right? So we do need to prioritize, and we do need to prioritize financially as well. But what I hope you take away from my presentation is we do have plans, and we do systematically try to prioritize projects that improve safety, or that address high crash intersections, right? Or that address the areas where the needs are, right? So certainly I hear you, but that is our goal, to ultimately try to address things as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, lovely presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Extremely informative. I have a question. When you were, Katya, you were talking about the lights and the bike routes and things like that. Is there a list or evaluations or whatever of lighting and areas that desperately need lighting? When you said that, what I had in mind was South Street, only a couple blocks up the road, where I almost hit someone a couple months ago because they came out of nowhere, black bike, black trousers, black hoodie over the face, no lights, and I was terrified because I did not see them till almost too late.
Yeah, we actually don't have a lighting study for all of our roadways, and I think it's a really good idea, actually. Something certainly I'll take away from this discussion, that we look at this kind of we look at that on a project-by-project basis, right? And it's one of the goals of an individual project is to make sure we improve lighting, but we actually don't have a town-wide survey, and I think that's a great idea.
I can give you a list. 'Cause
Well, certainly we know anecdotally where those are issues, right? South Street would be probably one of the first ones I would point to, too.
Yeah.
So we know anecdotally, but certainly we are a science and data-based group
Understand.
by our nature, so we certainly like to do our studies and make sure that we systematically address these issues. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you very much. And again, it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to give you guys some kudos on some things you've been doing for a long time, and you don't usually get credit. One is stormwater. You guys have been working on that for decades, and as a result, I think you've succeeded now to get many grants.
Yep.
Through the SNAP program, Southeast New England program, so kudos for that. And the other, to the members, really, the work that Hyannis Water is really the model for the rest of the town, putting in these filtration systems. And they have done really great work with the PFAS problem and bringing them safe water. So that's what we should take away, that's the future for the rest of the town. But I did have a couple of questions. One is on Yarmouth Road to Route 6. Is that still waiting takings, and how is that on your list?
Yeah, so that's a regionally significant project that certainly needs to get some attention. Right now, obviously, the intersection improvement
Right.
is occurring, and there needs to be continued regional prioritization for that project. I can say there's not active work being done on that right now. Certainly, it's something we anecdotally are always talking with our regional partners about. There are large challenges there, certainly land acquisition being one of them.
Right.
But it's something that needs to be in our forecast moving forward.
Great, thanks. And then I had, we've talked here about the future of energy, reliable and renewable energy, solar, wind, all of it. And the question came up to me, when they install these projects, particularly wind, they put these duct banks in these roads. And I was just wondering how you felt. When that goes, does that really need to be like a complete street program done in coordination, like Strawberry Hill Road? I mean, it's a complicated issue, but to put that stuff in and not give it the big picture.
Yeah, so issues aside and just looking at it technically, right? Yes. So certainly the infrastructure needs to be planned holistically with a project like that. It's what we did with Strawberry Hill Road.
Right.
We installed the sewer in advance of the duct bank because, frankly, there will be challenges with doing so after a piece of infrastructure like that is in the ground. And it's just smart planning to do that and to take advantage of the fact that, the developer had to pave the roadways so we didn't have to, right? There are challenges with that too, right? There's coordination with multiple entities and that's something that our team needs to deal with. But yes, and there's limited space under our public roadways, and taking up 5 to 7 feet of it requires some thinking and some planning in advance. So that's what we had to do with the previous project, and that's what we would have to do moving forward and plan to do.
Thank you. And my last one relates to ponds. We just finished our natural resource section. And, your map showed the comprehensive wastewater management plan areas, but, we've got over 100 ponds in Barnstable.
Yep.
How will the outlying ponds be brought into that program, or will they be treated individually?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have I'll call it a comprehensive pond program. It's arguably not comprehensive yet, but what we do is we annually, on at least twice a year through the Ponds and Lakes program, which you're very familiar with, right? We continue to advance that program to monitor all of our great ponds, as well as some of our other ponds. So our great ponds are the ponds in the community that are over 10 acres. Some of the other ponds that are of regular use, we monitor through that program as well. Amber in our office does a great job monitoring those ponds. How we deal with improvement of those ponds is systematic, right? So we have a prioritization list that we developed. We started this program about 5 years ago at this point, maybe 4. We're working with our natural resource staff, our conservation staff, and the engineering staff with Amber at the lead, developed the prioritization list based off what we're seeing, right? So data as well as what we're seeing, pond closures, and where are we having impairments in those freshwater bodies. And we take a science-based approach once again, right? We hire SMAST typically to do a study over the course of a year. They will go out and do additional sampling. So really intense sampling where they'll do sampling of the cores to understand what's going on in the bottom of the pond, as well as more sampling all throughout the season within the water column, as well as land use analysis to see what's coming into the pond. And they'll produce a management plan, which ultimately will come up with recommendations. A lot of, we've done 3 of those to date. We're in process on 2 more. So we've done Schubel Pond, we've done Long Pond, Marston's Mills, we've done Lovell's Pond. We're in the process of doing Lake Wequaquet right now, and we will be commencing Long Pond Centerville this year. In addition, some of our ponds and lakes associations do take it upon themselves to do studies, right? So like Mystic Lake, the IPA recently did a study, provided that data to us, and we agreed with the results and brought forward a capital project to do an alum treatment, which will be happening next fall, or this fall. So, we try to always take a science-based approach because we want to understand what's happening in the pond, and we try to make short-term improvements where it's possible. So Schubel Pond, for instance, we were able to do an alum treatment based on the characteristics of what we found. Ultimately, in that case, sewering is the answer. The inputs are a result of what's coming from the people who live on the pond, really. In some other cases, sewering is found to be the only answer, right? Or wastewater treatment in general, right? Really focused on phosphorus with freshwater bodies. Long Pond, Marston's Mills comes to mind, where the conditions in the pond an alum treatment really wasn't going to work. There was no point in doing an alum treatment and dumping a chemical into the pond that really wasn't going to do anything. Really, the ultimate goal there is wastewater treatment to fix that pond. What we are going to do in the short term is do a pilot project of a floating treatment wetland there, and that actually is something we're going to do this spring, and put a small floating treatment wetland out there and understand how it works and how much nutrients it takes up, and if it works at a pilot scale it up, and see if we can try to address it faster, because in our plan, you can look at our plan and where Long Pond Marston's Mills is, it's about as far away from our wastewater treatment plant as possible. So our plan right now is it's in phase 3, right? So it's going to take time to get there. And right now, there are limited capability IA systems to deal with phosphorus, right? So nor do we mandate that, right? So private property owners on ponds can take it upon themselves to put in those types of systems, but we weren't going to mandate that where we have a plan to address the wastewater in that case. So,
But one thing you could help us with is if you had some of these long-range studies that you wanted to see included in our plan.
Yeah.
We're really recommending
of course,
our things forward to the planning board
Yeah.
and the council and the commission. So if you had like a pond study or a beaches study that you really say, listen, we really need to get behind this long-range looking, that's where we can really help.
Yeah, so a lot of those were reflected in my presentation, some of the long-range goals, right? Didn't necessarily touch on freshwater bodies, but certainly we could provide some of that information, and we'd be happy to have Amber come in and speak to you all about freshwater bodies if you would like that as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'd like to wrap this up by 10. In 10.
Got a lot of questions
in 10
coming.
minutes. Another bag of chips. I think Mark and then Bob.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. It sort of runs along. We are obviously a land use, but this seems very labor intensive. I mean, is there an area right now that you're seeing a shortage in labor for the types of jobs that are doing? Is it trades men and women? Is it professionals? Are there people that we want to be attracting to the Cape? Just on a very high level.
All of the above. Yeah, so we have a very hard time hiring engineers on Cape Cod. So I think right now I have 6 to 8 vacancies in my group of 20 or so. So, we have a hard time bringing in engineers into our group, right? So a lot of what we're doing is focusing on younger folks who may not have necessarily as much experience and trying to grow them up through our program. Because finding qualified engineers generally is a result of life circumstance, right? So somebody decides they're moving to the Cape for whatever reason, and Barnstable seems like a great job, right? So certainly we have a problem with hiring engineers. Our operations staff, we certainly have a number of vacancies in those staffs as well. We have one arborist right now, right? So,
And is that just a function of housing or a function of lack of people?
it's hard to say, but I would say it's most likely a function of housing. A lot of times when we offer jobs to people, they really are excited about the job, and then they actually look at the bottom line, right? So I can't afford to live there, and I don't want to commute an hour to come work every day, right? So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
I just wanted to refer back to your discussion of the drinking water presentation you made with regard to the Hyannis area. We, of course, have several other water districts in the town, like Calm and
Yep.
Katuitt. Is there town oversight over those other districts to ensure that what you're doing, the town is doing with regard to the Hyannis drinking water issue, is also being done by the water companies, the water districts in those other districts which are not part of the Hyannis district?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is no, but certainly there's collaboration, and we certainly speak to the other districts and will provide advice, but we don't have any oversight over those districts. They're their own entities. So we will provide support as appropriate and as requested, but certainly we have plenty to do with our infrastructure as well. So we provide support to the extent we can, but ultimately, no, we don't provide oversight.
Thanks.
Yes.
Susan and then Cheryl.
Yeah, excuse me. That was a really good presentation. And you explained the tip in a way that I think people could understand.
I'm glad. I'm still trying to grasp it. So
Really, really hard to do. Just about, Lindsay said about things that you've been working on for a long time. And I just have to say, I'm so excited that we're going to actually be starting construction on the Cape Cod Rail Trail.
Yeah, me too.
When I started working for one of our previous state senators in 2001, we started talking about that not that long after that. So that, people, is how long transportation projects take. It's amazing. So one really quick question on lighting.
Yeah.
Do we use any of those lights that only shine down?
Yes.
We do.
Yeah, so
Good.
that's what we specifically spec. Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. What is your role in terms of deciding or looking at future needs for buildings?
Yeah, so my specific role, that's not my role, right?
yeah.
So our town architect could certainly speak more to that, and certainly Dan could, but, it's a systematic role. We generally are very systematic with how we deal with our infrastructure. So we do studies, we make sure we understand and try to predict when failure is going to occur on certain, say, mechanical equipment, or even like the roof. The roof is timed out at, 20 years, so we got to start planning for it at 15, and so on and so forth. So we try to take a systematic and educated approach to it, but certainly that doesn't mean that things that are unforeseen come up. That always is the case with infrastructure, right? So that would be our approach.
In terms of the maintenance of roads,
Yes.
which you've been talking about a lot, do you have the funding to keep up with that as much as you would wish to be able to be doing?
So we could always have more funding for roads, right? And the good thing about our approach is we have data that comes back, right? So we get our road surface ratings that come back, and at a minimum, we want to keep that flat, right? But ideally, we want to improve it, right? Over the years, we've been keeping it flat or slightly improving it. So certainly, there always could be more investment in our roads, but we try to find the happy median where we can keep up with having the level of standard of the roadways where we want to. That doesn't mean we can touch every road, though, right? So I think right now we always have the need for more funding for infrastructure, but I think we're satisfied with where we're at, but certainly would welcome more.
Yeah, no, you're keeping up.
Yeah.
Yes. And then last question is, I asked a question about this before, but there's, in terms of housing issues and greater density,
Yep.
how do you get involved in that? And what are you thinking about how to accommodate greater density?
We are every day, actually. So we get involved in it in almost every way. So when a development comes forward, planning staff usually hears from a developer first. They'll usually bring us into pre-application meetings to have some initial discussions with developers to understand, are there infrastructure needs? Can the infrastructure actually support this location or this proposal, right? We also are always looking at our infrastructure and making sure we're planning for growth, right? So there's planned growth and then there's unforeseen growth. We're always looking at somewhere in between, right? We want to make sure that we're dealing with planned growth, but also probably have capacity for some unplanned growth as well. So we're constantly bringing projects forward that deal with where we're anticipating growth. One example that's under construction right now on Main Street, on the west end, approaching the West End Rotary, is a new sewer pump station. That's a direct result of the growth of Hyannis, right? So we had capacity concerns in our sewers right here on South Street. And you think to yourself, well, that's actually quite a ways away. We, through some smart planning, are going to redirect some of the flow to that new infrastructure. We needed to build the new infrastructure there anyway because it was approaching the end of its useful life, but by building something a little bigger, we were able to actually deal with demand within the growth incentive zone such that we aren't going to have any sewer demand concerns within the growth incentive zone after that project's
So
complete.
does that include road improvements as well?
Yeah, certainly we would take the same approach to road improvements. That's just one that's under construction, right? So, every one of our projects, we always need to look at what's the need here, right? So when we do an intersection improvement, for instance, we have to do traffic counts to make sure we understand how many vehicles come through the intersection, how many are taking left turns, how many are going straight, how many are taking rights, so that we can design the traffic signals the right way, right? Or decide, do we need a left turn lane here or not, due to the need. So certainly that's always part, and when we do those studies, we're always projecting growth as part of it because that's just what you have to do for smart planning.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Cheryl, take us home.
I will. And actually, I can leave a couple of the questions. The important thing is I wanted to express my support for what my fellow committee member mentioned about the importance of those studies. And it would be very helpful for us if we could see some of those so we can see the results of that.
Of course.
And have access to it. And again, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I brought us home.
Good job, Cheryl. So Dan was right. This topic was vast. And I do think we'd like to hear, maybe it doesn't have to be an oral presentation, but I think we'd like to get some sense of the vertical needs of the town.
Yeah, one thing you can certainly refer to is our capital improvement plan, because that is how we express our needs every year, right? You'll see on there's a whole bunch of projects from me, but there's also a whole bunch of projects from Mr. Marinaccio as well. So that kind of expresses our at least 5-year needs when it comes to vertical construction.
One last question. Do you have a structural engineer in your staff?
We don't on staff.
Okay.
No. So we'll hire.
We just
consultants for
hired
that.
one, and I was going to kick myself if the old town hall building is very well made, I'm here to tell you.
Great.
Could we get a copy of
course.
your presentation?
Oh, yeah, I think we
course.
get all
Yeah,
of
okay,
these, and the public has access to them, too.
Of
On the
course.
website. Okay,
You want a motion?
yes, thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. And we will see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, right? Yes, and then we'll be in every village and hamlet in April. Thank you, guys. I want to buy land.